Mrs. Mangan, I think based on the time, I would recommend we begin. We have about 450 folks logged into the webinar and quite a substantial number already on YouTube. Anybody that arrives late, not to worry. This entire presentation will be posted tomorrow to our website. And as you will learn at the end of the presentation, all of this information is already online in great detail on a reopening webpage, although you will learn a great deal more tonight. Madam President, I turn it over to you for some opening remarks and the pledge.
You'd think by now I would have figured out the mute button. Since this is our third, and welcome to our third parent meeting to present our reopening plan. Monday night we met to share reopening plans for Harrison High School, last evening for Lewis M. Klein Middle School, and tonight for all 4 of our elementary schools. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who is here, both on the webinar and watching on our YouTube page. We want to thank all of the community members and parents who have reached out to us over the past many weeks with their thoughts and questions and concerns. We received numerous questions in advance of this meeting, all of which will be answered. Most of the questions we've received in advance, as well as ones that were raised, have been raised over the actual presentation. So I would like to hold on your questions as we work through the presentation. I'm confident that parents will see this evening, as we saw last night and Monday night, the incredible work that has been put into creating a reopening plan that we think will present the best opportunity for children to learn in our current environment. Here in the Harrison Central School District, we know how to educate children exceptionally well. You put children in a classroom with a professional in front of them who is an expert teacher who receives professional development on a regular basis throughout his or her career. You create opportunities for those educators to get to know their children, to teach them, and to help them grow as human beings. Unfortunately, we can't do that this year. There is a public health crisis, as we all know. It is not an education crisis. Unfortunately, as educators, each of the people on the screen have to deal with the public health crisis and what it's done and the issues it's created for education. I am confident that parents will see all of that expertise and the planning in the presentation tonight. I, as a parent, am exceptionally disappointed that my children will not be going into classrooms with their friends and their classmates and learning in the way that we know is best for them. But I am confident that all of the children in the Harrison Central School District will receive an excellent education this year, even in light of the public health crisis we face. So with that, Dr. Wool, I will turn it over to your team, administrators and teachers. I also want to thank, we have numerous members of the Board of Education, both on the panel and watching from home, all of whom have been deeply engaged in this work, and are here also as parents. So I want to thank them also for being here. Dr. Wool?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mangan. And I hope I don't make the same mistake I made last night at the end of the 3-hour meeting. I forgot to recognize one of our administrators who was here for the duration, Mr. Gutterman. I apologize tonight. He is here again, and I will introduce the entire team as we go through the presentation. There is a great deal to share, but I'm going to start with what we do in the world of Zoom, and that is share our screens. Let's hope this works, folks. Okay, so we'll come back to this web page in a moment, but I'd like to start here. Tonight is a night when we are going to devote the entire evening to trying to help you understand how we have come up with the plan that we've developed and what was the thought process, but as importantly, who's in charge. So there are a lot of recommendations that we have received from some of you, even from people in positions of authority. And I want to tell you the dilemma that I face. I consider myself, after 40 years in public education, an expert at educating children and leading an organization like ours. But we have all received from credible people conflicting information. I have some wonderful professionals in our own community with incredible credentials who have shared incredibly well thought out, thoughtfully researched material. And I've had other people with similar credentials provide me information that says the opposite. So do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? Is social distancing 6 feet? Is it 3 feet? Do young children spread? Do they not spread? So all of those things are not fully decided in my mind, or at least there is enough ambiguity in the science that we are struggling to help you make the right decision. But who is actually in charge of what we as a public school system do? Well, these are the folks that we report to on your screen. The New York State Department of Health establishes the circumstances under which we can open school and the parameters under which schools must be operated based on primarily infection levels. The New York State Department of Education, each year I swear an oath to carry out their mandates, as do the members of the Board of Education. They have also established several criteria, including how much time a child has to be in school, the purpose of school, what schooling needs to look like for all of the different populations. And then there's our national guidance, which comes from the Center for Disease Control. And that used to be the gold standard. Some would argue it's not anymore. And obviously that makes it difficult for us. But we do, under all circumstances, report to these people. So we don't get to make up the rules, contrary to some misperceptions. Right now, this was issued in mid-August. The governor's priorities for reopening our schools. I want you to read this carefully because this is the mandate that we're operating under right now. Prioritize efforts to return all students to in-person instruction at this time. Due to the dynamic nature of the local community transmissions, COVID-19, a phased-in approach, or a hybrid model, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, which combines in-person instruction and remote distance learning, may be necessary. And it not only may be necessary, at the moment it is necessary. And I will share with you, if you're following what's going on at the collegiate level, where schools open for 3 or 4 days and close, there is a strong likelihood that we will at some point also close. And so the model does consider that. But right now, our mandate is to bring back as many kids as possible. Our guiding principles are really simple, and they're not a surprise to anybody. Everything we do is based on the health and safety of students, faculty, and staff to the greatest extent possible. Some things are out of our reach. We'll talk about some of those tonight. And sometimes there is conflicting information. For example, the guidance from DOH says that it can be a mask or 6 feet. It doesn't have to be both. On the other hand, I want you to remember that our teachers are putting themselves in harm's way. They have children and families, and they're going to be exposed to far more children than anyone else. And in deference to their requests, which we, by the way, agree with, we will do both to ensure the health and safety not only of our teachers, but of your children. The other challenge for us in developing this plan was, I predicted, sadly, back in March when I started to mobilize the team and alert the board to our primary purpose, which is how do we get the organization ready for what is likely to happen in September. I felt pretty strongly that we were either going to remain in quarantine or that we would experience a series of openings and closings. And so my concern for your children is that they get a continuity of instruction. So as you will learn tonight, there are several variables that will help that. The hybrid model, what we're going to begin in, half the kids coming to school at one time, will not change if the infection rates go up and we are forced to close school. Their schedules will remain the same, their class sizes will remain the same, their experiences will remain the same. So the continuity of learning was a critical variable in how we crafted this plan. So here's what we were required to do. 100% in-person instruction. Everyone attends school. Someone wrote to me today and said, you didn't mention that in the plan. How are you prepared for in-person instruction? The good news is that's called school. We know how to do that. That would be the happiest day in everybody's life if our children, your kids, could come back to school full time. The hybrid model, which is what we're in right now, requires that we socially distance, and so only about 50% of the kids are going to come. That is the other mandated model. The third mandated model is 100% remote learning based on infection rates or when schools are closed. We were not mandated to add a fully virtual option. But on August 7th, my thinking, and when I shared it with the board, they agreed with this, the governor made an announcement. And, you know, I think the governor did an outstanding job of driving down the infection rates in New York State. He was explicit, he set out clear guidelines, and he said that if we follow these things, socially distancing, quarantining, we could bend the curve, and in fact we did. And he announced quite proudly, and I agree with his sense of pride, on the 7th, that the infection rate, the standard he had set to open schools was 5%, was actually below 1%, and so he declared that it was safe to open schools. Simultaneously on that day, he said some other things. He said that ultimately it's the choice of parents to make that decision and teachers. So in my mind, I'm a father, I'm also an educator. If I had heard that message, what I consider to be a mixed message, I would be concerned as to whether or not it was safe. On the one hand, you're saying it's safe. On the other hand, you're saying it's a personal decision. So the board and I took a step in violation of what we are required to provide you and want to give you back the choice to determine whether or not you think it's safe for your children to come back to school. It was an agonizing choice because the model of hybrid and virtual at the same time is demanding, and we will make it work. But ultimately where we landed was, we think you should make the best decision for your family, not us. So the required instructional models, I'll move quickly through this. Face-to-face learning is what we all want. The center of that Venn diagram is where we're living at the moment, hybrid, blended, and online learning. So that's where we are. What we have added to that is a remote option. If you are in the remote world, you will experience in-person teaching while kids are in school, and you'll experience the same at-home experience when they're at home. But before we get into the experiences that kids will have, and I promise you, once we get through this part, the most interesting part is to see how we have prepared our teachers and our organization to serve your children well. We want you to understand all of the things that we have done to make sure that your kids will be safe if you choose to send them. So social distancing, as I mentioned, and we're going to go into this in greater detail as we go through it. I'm going to move through this relatively quickly. So the number of students who ride the bus will be about half. There'll be one student in each seat, with the only exception being a sibling. Everybody will be masked on the bus, including the monitors, including the bus driver. The only exception is if the bus driver has glasses. DOT permits him to lower his mask so they do not fog. All of our classrooms have been rearranged already to have 6-foot distancing, and we have determined what's the appropriate number of children in each space. There'll be signage like you see everywhere in the world to social distance, to wash your hands. We will Designate some hallways, but not all, to be one way because our buildings aren't constructed that way, but we'll talk later when we get into the details of each building about traffic flow. The principals each have a different plan based on the unique layout of their buildings. In Parsons and Preston School, it's possible that lockers will still be in use in some staggered way. We'll talk more about that later. And probably the most challenging thing, and the principals will talk to you and they'll be sending you specific information about your school, is how we're going to manage the drop-off and pickup. This is the part that makes everybody uncomfortable, including me. Everybody's going to wear face coverings pretty much all the time. There will be a lot more talk about mask breaks and the like as we get deeper into the presentation, and later I will show you where on our website all of the information about masks is contained in one place. So staff will be required to wear them at all times. Some limited exceptions when eating. Medical conditions or disabilities, in that case, and that's a rare case, we would still have a face shield and we would make a determination as to whether or not that child could attend a regular classroom. We encourage you to provide the masks. The research has changed on which masks are most effective, so that's a personal decision, but we know some masks are not. We're going to post the latest information and research on our website shortly. In the event your child forgets their mask, either on the bus or in school, we have 450,000 on hand, so 40,000 on hand, I'm sorry, and we will be providing them whenever they're needed, and we have more coming in the next couple of weeks. We don't want visitors in school. We will talk more about visitors. We also have a series of steps that people will take before they'll be permitted to visit, and we will talk more about that as we go forward. But what we have learned is that each administrator has to have discrete and expanded responsibilities. My invaluable assistant human resources HR person, Dr. Brian Lidwig, whose voice you hear whenever you get a snow day message, has the very unfortunate task of managing all of the COVID protocols. He is essentially at the top of the chain, except for me, in managing the through line of communications that will monitor all aspects of the protocols necessary to keep not only children but adults safe. So Brian, I know you're there. I'm going to ask if you could just take us through how the daily health screenings will occur, and I know you'll talk about faculty and students as well.
Thanks, Dr. Wool. The Department of Health and the New York State Education Department have mandated that school districts perform daily screenings of students and staff before they come to school. And that's to identify anyone who may be symptomatic or may have a fever or may have had exposure to somebody with COVID-19 so that we can prevent them from coming to school. The guidance recommends that these screenings occur at home, and there's a few reasons for that that make pretty good sense. First of all, parents know their children better than anyone else, so you know when your child's not feeling well or something's not quite right, and you can have a conversation with them about how they're doing on that day, and so you know your child best. The other reason, though, for that is that if we have parents complete the screening before the child leaves home, then we avoid having, let's say, that child on the bus with other classmates, or standing at a bus stop, or walking with peers to school. So it makes good sense that parents would complete the screening beforehand, but we'll be well equipped to be able to take a student's temperature or the screening after or once they arrive at school if the parent's unable to. But we're really encouraging parents to do this in partnership with the school district, because we have to take a community-based partnered effort on this to ensure that we have the information we need in order to welcome kids to school safely. A few details to share with you about how this will work. So we'll be sending an email to parents every night, overnight, with the idea that in the morning, before a child leaves for school, or even a staff member leaves for work to come to the district, they would answer some questions that have to do with symptoms and exposure to COVID-19, as well as confirm that they don't have a temperature over 100 degrees Fahrenheit without any fever suppressing medication, because we know, of course, sometimes ibuprofen or Tylenol or other drugs can mask a fever. So we want to confirm that no students or staff are febrile before they come to work. And that information will be entered into an app that the district has researched and identified. By answering those questions, it does a couple of things. First of all, for middle and high school students, and I mention that here even though this is an elementary audience because you may have older children, so I'll only mention it briefly. It will send a color-coded badge to the student's phone that the student can show upon arrival. In that case, in this screen, you can see it on the right-hand side there. It's a green badge that says, I'm cleared to come to school. But we know many elementary school children, of course, don't come to school with phones. So we will be able to use a QR code screen, which every student will be assigned a dedicated QR code, which will be able to scan upon the child's arrival to school. We're also even thinking about printing them and laminating them and attaching them to backpacks so that it's just easier to do the quick scan of the QR code. And what that will tell us instantaneously is that the parent has completed the survey and that the student is cleared to come into school. As you can see on this screen, green means they're cleared for entry. If we go all the way over to the right on your screen, you see gray, which means uncertified, which is simply that the parent didn't complete the survey that morning. As I said earlier, we'll be prepared to take the student's temperature and manage the entry upon arrival, but then we'll be following up with a phone call, asking parents and strongly encouraging them to make sure that they tend to that responsibility every morning. We know it's challenging sometimes in the bustle of the morning, but we think if parents build a routine, it can be quite successful. The system will also be coded to know that this is a day that a student is reporting to school, or this is a day that a student is learning remotely. So if a student shows up and we scan their barcode or their QR code and it's blue, it'll tell us that's a day that they're scheduled to be remote learning. So we'll address that at the time. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see red and orange. The red will indicate to us that questions have been answered in the screening tool that tell us that the child has had perhaps exposure to somebody that had COVID-19 based on reports from what information the parents have shared, or that they're feeling symptomatic, that they have either a fever or that they may be symptomatic. It would show up as orange. Of course, and this is reinforced with the message to parents that they receive every day, if your child is symptomatic, has any symptoms whatsoever, we need parents to be good partners to us and make sure that they keep children home on those days. It's essential to us as we prevent not only the spread of COVID-19, of course, but any communicable illness in school. So any symptoms that a child isn't feeling well, we can't stress enough how important it is that parents keep their children at home. I'll mention that staff will be performing the same self-check every day, and we have it set up as well that visitors to our schools, even though as Dr. Wool mentioned, we're going to try to minimize the number of visitors to our schools. We know we'll have some visitors. And so they too will be able to scan a QR code upon arrival, have their temperature taken, and then we'll be able to verify their entry to school. One of the other features that this app will afford to us is the ability to do contact tracing, a term you've probably come to know. And that simply means that if we have a student or a staff member who tests positive for COVID-19, this app will help us because it's tied into our student information system. So if a student, for example, were positive, it would generate instantaneously for us information about this classmates in that student's schedule in the day, as well as staff members or teachers that they might have had interactions with. And that's information that we're obligated to share with the Department of Health. Because the Department of Health becomes then responsible for doing the outreach directly to those individuals, but it's our charge as a school district to help facilitate that process by sharing information with them. So we think this is a good system. We researched a number of different ways of managing the arrival of students and staff and visitors to make sure that as they enter the building, they're asymptomatic. And we do believe that it makes the most sense to have parents share that responsibility with us in the morning. It's going to help expedite their arrival, and it will, we think, give us very good, reliable information that we can use to make sure that kids and staff are safe.
Thanks, Brian. I just want to take a pause. There are some questions I think would be worthwhile answering, but I also want to remind folks, I said something at the outset, so every administrator is taking on additional responsibilities. Every teacher, as we go through this, will be accepting additional responsibilities. Every custodian, every cleaner, every aide. and unfortunately every parent. So part of this presentation tonight, there's an underlying theme. How do we work together and find the best tools to make this doable? We certainly know that this is difficult for parents. I think this app will do a lot to facilitate it. A couple of quick questions about this very thing. If your child is an elementary school student and they have a computer, we would still likely recommend we use the QR code, because we don't want kids at an entrance having to unpack things if they don't have a phone. So you don't need to worry about that. We will figure it out. The question about masks, we will talk more about masks. We're not going to make recommendations. We'll post studies. There's a recent study from Duke University that we're going to be posting as a resource. But I think that's a parental decision by and large. And the question about the hearing impaired will be answered in detail later, but absolutely teachers that are speech pathologists or where a child needs to see a teacher's mouth, they will have transparent masks. So, and how do we guarantee a parent is being truthful? We have no guarantees. As I said innumerable times, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, our well-being now is inextricably linked. If we can work together, we can probably keep schools open. But if people don't abide by these rules, these common sense guidance in their own personal lives, it'll absolutely affect all of us. So thank you for that. Dr. Liebig, I'm going to now take you to your next slide, which is the protocol symptom, the symptom protocol, which is quite confounding.
Yeah, thank you. So we've been working, the district's been working very closely with the New York State Department of Health, the Westchester County Department of Health, with direct contacts there, with our school district physician and with our school nurses to develop a COVID-19 symptom or health protocol. And this protocol will identify the circumstances under which we will handle the referral of students or staff members who become sick. So the protocol, interestingly, even though we've received some guidance from the Department of Health, the Department of Health hasn't yet given us explicit guidance on exactly what constellation or combination of symptoms would be considered as a suspected case of COVID-19 and require referral for testing. We're still waiting and expecting to get that explicit guidance, and that's important because every parent knows that on any given day in an elementary school, we're going to have kids in the nurse's office who don't feel well, who are maybe have a sore throat or have a stomach ache. Those are common ailments, and we want to be very careful that as the nurse is assessing those, she's using really explicit and transparent criteria for making decisions about when a student needs to be picked up and referred for testing and possibly for isolation, depending on whether or not that's required by the Department of Health. When we do assess symptomatic students or adults, that will be done by the school nurse who will be trained in this protocol by our school physician. Both the nurse and the individual that's feeling symptomatic will have additional PPE to keep both of them safe. We're going to have a dedicated isolation area in each school, which we've already identified. And this will be an area where the nurse can obviously give care for the person that's not feeling well, and also arrange for the pickup of that individual, that person, that student by a parent. Then that space will be disinfected and cleaned after each use. And we've been working, as we'll share later in the presentation, on some new technology that the district's going to be using for the disinfecting of these spaces. It's important to say that decisions about quarantining individuals or isolating individuals, and there's sometimes some confusion between those terms, quarantining is directed by the Department of Health when an individual has had close contact with somebody who's tested positive with COVID-19. You might be wondering, well, what is close contact? Actually, the Department of Health defines close contact as being within 6 feet and for more than 10 minutes of somebody who has tested positive. So part of the assessment that a nurse will do is to talk to an individual, as will the Department of Health when they do that outreach. Isolation is when a person is sick or not feeling well or awaiting a test result from a COVID-19 test, and that typically is for 10 days. And then the individual needs to be symptom-free for 72 hours in the course of that 10 days or toward the end of that 10 days before returning, or can have a negative COVID test. So all of these criteria will be not only listed on our website, many of them already are, but a few we're still waiting for some additional guidance. But it's very important just to say again out loud, it's the Department of Health that will issue or direct when the individual needs to quarantine or isolate. We'll be working closely with them, as I said before, sharing information in support of their efforts to contact trace. It's important to mention with regard to the last bullet there that each school will have a designated COVID-19 liaison. That's going to be a person in the school that's well trained in these protocols and will be able to do direct outreach to me as the district coordinator. And then I have a direct line, of course, to our school district physician and to contacts at the Department of Health. The clarity and the streamlined communication that's required of this so that we can be responsive in a situation where somebody's symptomatic and we can share information in a timely way with the Department of Health is critical. And parents will, I hope, understand and appreciate that when we do outreach about an instance of somebody perhaps being a suspected case or a confirmed case, we'll share the information we can, but we also have to respect privacy and the confidentiality of that individual. And that's just important to say because we'll be sure to honor that obligation as well.
Brian, I'm just going to read and answer some questions. We do not make the determination as to whether or not a person can come back to school. Those guidelines are issued by the Department of Health. So if someone's concerned about a false negative test, that wouldn't be under our purview. And can you talk a little bit about how families would be notified in the event they were exposed to someone in school? As I understand it, this Department of Health makes those determinations, but you want to speak more about that?
Yeah, it's meant to be a hand in glove relationship between the school district and the Department of Health. So if we have a suspected or confirmed case, we reach out to the Department of Health, we share the information. They're likely going to ask us for information on what they consider to be close contacts or proximate contacts. And then they're going to advise us on how we can best partner with them to share information with families. We'll be working, as I said, very closely with them so that we respect their authority in making some of these determinations. And we'll be communicating as transparently with parents as we can.
And I just want to go back because I know it's people hear it for the first time and they're confused. The only way you get to come back with a negative test is if you had a positive test and then after an incubation period you test negative. People who do not have a positive test are quarantined for 14 days. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there's always been some confusion about this. So quarantine is the result of exposure, direct close contact with somebody who is known to have tested positive. If you're in that situation, the Department of Health is going to mandate that you quarantine, which means that you stay at home for 14 days. And even if you go and seek and obtain a test that says you're negative, you're required to fulfill your 14-day quarantine. And the reason for that is that there's an incubation period for this disease. So if you have your exposure and you start your quarantine and you go after 3 days to get tested and it comes back negative, it's entirely possible that still within that incubation period on day 10, 11, 12, 13, you could be positive or become positive. So we don't release somebody from quarantine. The Department of Health won't release someone from quarantine simply as a result of a negative test. In the case of an isolation, that 10-day waiting period, that's for people who are tested positive or symptomatic. Those individuals will be instructed to isolate for 10 days. And then when their symptoms toward the end of those 10 days are resolved for at least 72 hours, then they're released from isolation and can come back. The state has relaxed its requirements on a negative test in order to release from isolation. In part, I think because the tests have not been as readily available, but also because the results can be very hard to obtain in a timely way. So their revised guidance speaks to that 10-day isolation with 3 days being without symptoms.
And I'm going to move along, but I understand everybody's anxiety. So some of the questions revolve around which kids in a class could be quarantined. All of those things will be ferreted out in consultation with the Department of Health. There is no singular answer. And to the extent that we can notify you and protect everybody's rights, that will also be guided by the work of the Department of Health. So all of these
Well,
protocols.
if I could just,
Yep,
if
please.
just quickly address one of the questions I see here. It asks how many students or adults can be held. Oh no, that's not it. The one that I saw was
In the quarantine room.
that's right. Well, what if no, not that one. It was the one that was, will an entire class be required to quarantine if a child tests positive? Again, that's going to be a determination made by the Department of Health, but they're going to apply that standard I mentioned before, which is whether or not they've had close contact, which is less than 6 feet for more than 10 minutes. So if students and staff are honoring their obligation to socially distance and wear their masks, then it's very likely that those individuals would not be considered close contacts and therefore would not be required to quarantine. But again, all in consultation and at the direction of the Department of Health.
And I'm gonna answer one, and then I want you to look at the last one that popped up because we've talked at length about this. But the quarantine room is not designed to hold more than a singular person. However, should there be an outbreak, we would just clear another room and make it available. So I want you to know that we plan for contingencies, but we're not going to go over every single one tonight. But these are questions that are worth answering. So if a child has a cold, what is the guidance on that?
That's a great question. And that's part of the symptom profile criteria that we're working to get from the Department of Health, because we're going to see colds, we're going to see the flu, we're going to see allergies, seasonal allergies, and we don't want to necessarily assume that each instance of that presentation of symptoms is COVID-19. On the other hand, we don't want to overlook symptoms that could be an indication of COVID-19. So this is where the criteria that we'll be obtaining from the Department of Health will be very important. Preliminarily, what they've indicated to us is that a fever plus one of the known symptoms for COVID-19 will require the student go home and likely be referred for testing. But any one symptom other than that profile won't necessarily require referral for testing. Again, waiting for the clarity that we need from the Department of Health to be more specific and definitive, but we expect to have that before the opening of school.
And we'll be getting to some of the other questions later in the presentation. Please don't ever feel like you're being ignored. You're not. Thank you, Brian. Apologize. There we go. So Margaret Meduno is our treasurer. She also works with our business official, Robert Salerno, hand in glove. She is well-versed in everything that has been going on. We've been working all summer to make sure we had very stringent cleaning protocols in place. Margaret, would you mind taking us through these slides?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Wool. So as Dr. Liu mentioned, the Assistant Superintendent for Business has worked very closely with the Director of Facilities to make sure that every school is equipped with the proper cleaners that they need and that the staff is properly trained. So you can see we are requiring mandatory daily cleaning checklists that will be maintained by each school's custodial crew. So after the cleaning has taken place, the custodian will sign off on the log to show that it was completed, and then the head custodian will also sign off on that log. We are using specialized electrostatic disinfectant applicators. We currently have 6 in-house and another 4 on the way. All custodial staff has been trained in this use, and what it is that, basically as the disinfectant is sprayed through the applicator, there's a charge at the end of it, and it creates a static so that when the disinfectant comes out, almost in the form of a fog, it looks for every surface to adhere to. So, places that maybe wouldn't get cleaned as thoroughly if you were doing it just by hand with a sanitizing wipe, under desks, under chairs, every area within the classroom will be hit by this disinfectant. We'll be cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting. We'll focus on touch points like tables, chair armrests, doorknobs, light switches, keyboards, with a special focus on restrooms as well. All cleaning products must be EPA approved, and they are all certified to be effective on the coronavirus. Those will be used throughout every school. In addition to these procedures, available in every classroom, we'll have sanitizing wipes, we'll have spray disinfecting bottles, and pump hand sanitizers. Hand sanitizer machines will also be set up throughout each school in strategic locations. As Dr. Will mentioned earlier, we have 40,000 masks on hand. So in the event that a student or staff member needed one, there are plenty on hand with the intention of purchasing many more. And then lastly, there are, as students enter the classroom, there are going to be paper desk coverings available. So each student will get a sheet of paper that they can cover their desk with. So, you know, instead of just, you know, using the sanitizing wipes, or they can start out with a fresh area of that paper covering to ensure that it's a totally clean area to start with. And at the end of the day, that paper will be thrown away so that, you know, it'll start fresh the next day. In the event, I don't think this is as likely at the elementary level, but if classes were to switch, then those paper coverings would be changed in between classes as well.
And I just would like to share some of the challenge that some of the regulations pose for us. If you've tuned into any of our other meetings, our intention initially was to allow particularly high school, middle school students access to sanitary wipes so they could wipe down their own desks. Unfortunately, the regulation forbids having students do that. They can elect to do it, but they can't be directed to do it. So we have made them available for kids if they want that in addition to the paper covering, essentially, that covers their desk almost like a tablecloth. But that was the solution that our district and many districts are following due to that regulation. There's a little bit of an irony in that kids go to our fitness center at the high school and we require them to wipe down their equipment between uses, but that was prohibited. Margaret, if you just continue on, this is the one that has everyone understandably anxious, but let's talk about it and then I'll jump back in.
Sure. So as far as ventilation, most classrooms have unit ventilators, which does mix outside fresh air with the interior air regularly. All unit ventilators will have special MERV filters. Classroom windows and doors will be kept open as practicable, which is a change from prior practice where doors have always been kept shut. Ceiling fans will be installed by the school opening in any rooms that have limited air circulation. And then we've purchased 100 iWave ion generators, which are being installed in all air conditioning units in non-window spaces, mostly in offices, could be a library. And it's a filter that goes into the air conditioning unit. And as air passes by, the ions actually work to neutralize bacteria, viruses, and mold spores anywhere in the breathing zone.
Thank you. I'm just going to run through some of these questions to try to stay up with you guys. Students certainly can bring their own package of wipes and keep them in their backpack or locker if they want. That's absolutely fine. The touch points will be cleaned as often as we can. Mr. Salerno and Mr. Purcell have reorganized the cleaning protocol so that there'll be more cleaning throughout the day. And as Margaret mentioned, the disinfectant, what other districts are calling a deep cleaning and closing to do, because our custodians in the elementary level work until 10 o'clock and at the secondary level till 11 o'clock, that so-called deep cleaning will occur daily in all of our spaces. Let me see what else. So the doors being left open, are there other measures to compensate for a lack of security? So let me be clear. It is not exterior doors. It is classroom doors that will be left open. And when we get to the section where our principals will be talking to you, you'll be learning about all of the drill practice that will be occurring for both the Husky and the Pride group and how those drills will occur. The closing of a classroom door is actually a safety fire protocol. And the state has said in this instance, most of our schools are completely fire retardant anyway, that a window and door can be open to improve ventilation. So it was not exterior doors, let me be clear on that. So this is very basic. We're going to continue to work with you to make sure your children know how to protect themselves, but these are some of the things that we have in place. Margie, you want to just bring us through this one?
Oh,
I can do it. I'm sorry. Are you-
oh, that's okay.
Yep.
So in order to further promote hygiene in schools, we are going to have signage just to remind people, students and staff about regular hand washing. They'll be posted throughout each school and in restrooms. I think those signs have been in the restrooms since the beginning of this all, for sure.
Yeah.
Again, like I mentioned, hand sanitizers will be placed in strategic locations through each school. Every classroom will have them. They'll be in hallways, they'll be in entrances, cafeterias, and bathrooms. Water bottles, so water fountains have all been turned off at this point. And most of us have seen now that we have in its place a water bottle filling station. So we're going to be encouraging students to bring their own water bottles, and they'll just put it right under. There's no touching even involved. You just put it right under and it'll fill the water bottle right up. And then germ barriers will be added in strategic locations in each school. That actually has, I want to say, probably is mostly completed at this point.
It is mostly completed. It's the high traffic areas where the public or lots of kids are coming through. Also, we'll talk more about bathrooms, and there's a whole section in this presentation about reorienting both faculty and kids to school. But for example, in the boys' rooms, every other urinal has been shut off, and closed off, so that we are even ensuring social distancing in the bathrooms, and kids will be informed of that. And I don't know about you, but I have a lot of confidence that when kids are well informed and thoughtfully instructed, they can carry this out. So I'm going to turn to my 4 esteemed colleagues, elementary principals, to just talk a little bit about student entry and dismissal and lunches. Each school has a slightly different plan, obviously based on the physical plant, but they can talk to you in general about these items. So who'd like to take the lead?
I'll take the lead on it.
Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome. So good evening, everyone. As Dr. Will mentioned, each building is laid out slightly differently. So each principal will be creating and communicating the specific plans. But we are, in general, looking at how do we provide a safe entry and dismissal from school. That will include using separate entrances for different grade levels. Arrival and entry by its nature is more of a rolling, because there's sort of a rolling time as students arrive. So it's a little more socially distant. Dismissal may have staggered dismissal times depending on grade levels, as well as different exits from the building. And students will be socially distanced when they enter the building as they wait to go into classrooms. And then lunch, students will have lunch each day, as they always have, by grade level. And when they are seated in the cafeteria, they will be cohorted and assigned seats. And students will be, each cafeteria has been redesigned to allow for social distancing. So we know how many kids can fit at a table, and maybe a little different school by school, but those students will be 6 feet apart. When all the students are seated and they're ready to eat, they will then take their masks off, have a mask break in the cafeteria, have some time to eat their lunch. They'll put their mask back on and head out to recess.
And I think one of the things I want to pause here, because there have been some questions, why are you not sending the kids home for lunch? Part of the social emotional well-being of children is linked to social connection. And we think these cohorts are very small, 3 kids at a table, typically, socially distanced. They're only taking their masks off to eat. Kids need a chance to connect to one another, and we thought this was a thoughtfully constructed way to give them some time to just feel like they're in school again. So let me just move ahead to my next slide. Visitors, orientations, back to school night. I'll go through the basics, but I'd like you guys to talk particularly about kindergarten orientation and open houses. So across the system, we've had to rethink how this is going to happen. You heard Brian Ladwig talk about, we don't really encourage visits. So you would have to schedule that visit, and you would have to go through the COVID-19 checkpoints before you'd be able to enter at all. But we will be scheduling virtual visits whenever possible. Kindergarten orientation is incredibly important to us. 6th grade orientation is incredibly important, as is 9th grade. So we've been thinking about how do we introduce children, in the case of kindergartens, to school for the first time, 6th graders for middle school for the first time, and 9th graders next week to the high school. Who's going to take the lead on kindergarten orientation for us?
I can do that.
Thank you, Mrs. Himes.
You're welcome. So kindergarten orientation every September is a little bit bumpy. Almost always we see kindergartners clinging to mom or dad or whoever brought them to school, and we expect that that will happen this year as well. We have thought about how to make that easier for both parents and for students, and have really involved our classroom teachers and our school psychologists in developing plans to, let's say, make it more enticing for your 5-year-old to want to come into the school. We have prepared virtual orientations for parents. We know that particularly for new families, if you haven't had a child at the elementary level yet, if your first child is going to kindergarten, you may not have even seen the school. Typically throughout the summer, we would do tours for parents and maybe even have children come in to see their classrooms a little bit earlier. Because we weren't able to do that, and because the typical orientation that we would have had for parents back in the spring didn't happen, each school will be doing a virtual orientation so that you can get the lay of the land, you can see the school, you can hear about what a typical day will look like. You'll hear about that tonight as well. We want you to feel as comfortable as you can in sending your son or daughter to school. As I said, the kindergarten teachers and the school psychologists are working on some activities that will entice the kids to want to come into the classroom. Part of that, weather permitting and depending on the geographics of the school, we may be able to do some of that outside before we bring them into school. Orientation for kids, kindergarten through 5th grade, happens every year anyway. One of the things that teachers feel very strongly about and that we have always known is a good idea is to make sure that kids get used to the rituals and routines of how school works. We've always talked about how we walk in the hallways. The only difference this year is that we will be implementing the physical distancing piece. We've always talked about washing our hands before and after lunch, and you know, when kids use the restrooms, all of those things will continue. So there will be some rituals that are new this year, but in every grade level, teachers will be spending time, Mrs. Spagnola and I and the rest of the principals and the assistant principals will be spending time with students to make sure that they understand these rituals. We will also be, I know some parents are really worried about the virtual piece and how their little one will do at home. Part of the advantage that we have this year that we haven't had in the past or when we went home in the spring is that children will be in school. So their classroom teacher is going to teach them as part of their routine how to learn from home. I've heard from a number of parents about the idea of the socializing being so important. Kids are going to socialize in school. Again, it may look different this year than it has in other years, but physical proximity alone does not build community in a classroom. The tone that the teacher sets helps to build community. We can send messages to kids that we are a family, we are a community, we can have a good time, we can learn. And I don't think that the physical proximity is going to have a great bearing on that. It will be different, but I think if we send the right messages to kids, I think the kids will pick up on that. We are also going to get our physical education teachers, who are some of the best I've ever worked with, to help with recess so that kids can know what they can play safely and, you know, make those adjustments. As time goes on, we'll adjust when we need to. We'll adjust if something's not working. And, you know, we appreciate the questions and the input that you've given us so far.
Thank you, Valerie. And there are 2 questions that emerge from that discussion that I'd like to respond to. Yes, there will be early drop-off in the schools.
Yes.
That will be maintained, trying to help working parents in whatever way we can. I also want to commend the mayor and the town board. They're trying to, as best they can, help us mount some kind of a low-cost childcare for working families. Hopefully we'll have more on that to follow. And there was another question. Oh, recess, that's what it was. Unfortunately, the answer as to whether or not kids have to wear a mask outdoors, the answer is still yes. I wish the answer were no. This, to me, is one of the most important things I want everybody to think about and remember. So we are all anxious to get back to school, these beautiful buildings behind me. They miss kids and they miss faculty. But the schools that children left, unfortunately for now, will not be the schools they return to. And so it's not so much about an orientation for kids that have been there before, but rather a reorientation. And our faculty has to go through that same recalibration. Now, you're going to hear in a few minutes that we've done a lot of that already, but let me just give you some information that might give you some comfort. So there'll be 2 full days before your children arrive that focus on training on the safe reopening of schools, including all the protocols we just talked about. Even though faculty meetings have already occurred virtually, it will be reinforced when folks come back to school. The wearing of face coverings, recognizing symptoms of COVID-19. Most importantly, and this is a credit to our Director of Special Education, well before COVID was an issue, all of our guidance counselors have been thoroughly trained in trauma informed and trauma responsive practices, and they're going to reintroduce all of those critical concepts to the entire faculty on those first 2 days, because many kids, trauma is a strong word, so not everybody's been traumatized, but kids are struggling, and we want to make sure teachers have the right supports and tools. Also, we want to give teachers the chance to reorient themselves. They're going to go back to a classroom that's socially distanced. It's likely going to have a webcam. They have to look at and master all of the technologies that they're going to be required to manage. So that will take a considerable amount of time. But ultimately, the success or failure that we're all going to experience together will be based on the quality of the instruction of our faculty. And I say this with all honesty. Our faculty is among the finest I've ever seen assembled anywhere. We hire carefully and thoughtfully, and we professionally develop at a level that's unprecedented. And our teachers participate in professional learning in unprecedented ways. So we are announcing tonight, we've actually announced it for the last 2 nights, that school will begin a day later. Kids won't miss that day. It'll be made up in February. You'll see the slide in a second. But the reason for that 3rd day is the first 2 days are focused on all the organizational things teachers have to get their heads around. But we want to make sure teachers have a chance to breathe, to work together, and focus on instruction so that those first 5 to 10 days are thoughtfully and thoroughly constructed so that your kids have a great experience coming out of the box. Also, this is an opportunity for us to remind our teachers that there are social and emotional supports in place for them. Probably the most daunting task that I've had this summer is thinking about the experience of kids and what we want that to look like, and the incredible increase in responsibility and challenge that poses for a very dedicated faculty. So here's exactly in writing what I said a minute ago. The first day of school will be September 9th, and the superintendent's conference day, which was scheduled for February 5th, will be changed on our calendar to a full day of instruction. This is an equally important slide, and I'm going to turn it over to one of the principals to manage, but in the same manner that faculty are coming back and need to sort of recalibrate what they're experiencing and feel comfortable in the environment, we're going to devote a considerable amount of the opening of school to helping your children experience that. I don't know who's taking this one.
I can do it. Oh, Mark, go ahead.
I was actually going to start by saying good evening and just building off of this and saying this is quite a bit of what Ms. Himes was just talking about, how, you know, the start of every school year presents an orientation and reorientation for all of our students. Obviously, this year we have a different type of reorientation for our students that we'll be preparing. And as Dr. Wool just mentioned, during those superintendent conference days where our faculty and staff will be focused on orienting and reorienting themselves, we'll be deep in conversation and discussion about the best ways to bring our students back into the classrooms to help them know in appropriate, age-appropriate ways what are the new safety protocols that we have in place. What is social distancing, and how are we keeping our masks, our face coverings on throughout the day, reinforcing all the things that I'm sure that you have been in your homes as well. Talking to them about the hybrid model and what it means to be. So some days we're going to be learning in school, and here's what it's going to look like when we're in school. And the days when you're learning from home, here's what that work is going to look like, and here's how I'm going to support you throughout the way. So that's certainly work that we are ready for, and we'll be engaging in to start this school year.
Thank you, Mark. And I think that we are well aware that it's been a long time since kids have been in school. And so in addition to the reorientation, teachers are going to be highly attuned to how kids are doing and be in regular contact with you. The presentation shifts a little bit now to the work that we have done to get ready to teach your children. We will return towards the end to answer all the other questions related to lunch and transportation and all those things, but to keep you with us, we wanted to make sure that we pace this well. So this is probably the slide that I am the proudest of, because I think it's a reflection of who we are as a learning community. Way back in March and April, I asked myself what I thought ended up being a critical question. How can we prepare the organization for what I thought would be, quite frankly, a fully quarantined September? Best case scenario, what I hoped for was what we're going to land on, which is a hybrid model. And I looked out at the board and this incredible group of professionals I have and said, we need to figure out starting now. You guys were worried about graduation, and so were we, but this was what was really on our mind. How do we get our faculty who were lurched into this new learning dynamic without any preparation to get them prepared for what is likely going to continue? So we did a couple of, I think, really important things. We began to research, and in a few minutes I'll introduce my assistant superintendent for human resource, for curriculum instruction, who did a magnificent job of orchestrating this. But we did some research. We worked with teachers, instructional specialists who you'll meet tonight. We tried to determine what kind of learning loss kids were experiencing, where teachers were struggling in the hybrid model. Some had good success and some struggled, understandably. So we had a brief opportunity to reconfigure everything. So we did a complete program design overhaul. First, we expanded by 5 times the number of kids who participate in our summer programs for 2 reasons. First and foremost, to address any learning gaps, and you'll hear more about that. But secondarily, we wanted to have all of these kids as a learning lab, so our teachers, who are engaging in over 75 professional development experiences this summer, could go into those classrooms working with our own students and determine what are the most effective models. And we learned some profound lessons. One of the things we know is that even the best, most effective teachers struggle to maintain and stay fully engaged with 22 kids in a Zoom session. It really starts to diminish at around 15. And so that's one of the reasons we've decided, if we go virtual or in hybrid, that we don't want more than 12 in a class, so that teachers can be effective, which is what you really want. We also spent a lot of time re-examining what we teach, because the curriculum in real time didn't translate perfectly into the virtual world. And so we've already devoted, and you're going to hear a lot about this tonight, 1,000 hours with teachers in rewriting and redesigning curriculum. And there are 500 more hours to go before we open school. But currently, through the incredible work of the elementary team, 500 lessons have already been designed and are ready and been field tested. What will happen next is we'll begin to implement, and unlike others, we're going to survey you in September. After we have implemented the model, at the end of 2 weeks, you're going to be getting mostly a survey about your building experience. At the end of 4 weeks, we'll be asking you more about programmatic issues, and we'll assess across the system what adjustments. And at the end of 10 weeks, which is essentially a marking period at the elementary school, it's really called a trimester. But towards the end of that trimester, we will be giving you a more comprehensive survey. And everybody on this meetings, the faces you're staring at, will be the people in the field supporting teachers every day. That is our primary goal, because for your children to be successful, our teachers have to be thoroughly engaging and being able to teach effectively. So I want to introduce this next person because he's the person that has been orchestrating all of this work the entire summer. He's the person who led the redesign of the summer programs and the professional development courses, and he's going to take you through the next several pieces of this presentation, which are all about how instruction has evolved in this environment. Mr. Greenfield?
Thank you, Dr. Wool. So we're going to move on to the next slide. So I'm going to spend a few minutes expanding on some of the key points that Dr. Wool outlined about the shift that we made as we realized that we were moving from an emergency situation of remote learning to an extended need to provide remote learning. And then, as we anticipated, as was outlined, the need to plan for September. So as we come closer and closer to September, we look back on approximately 4 months of very careful design work. And I'm joined in the next session, in the next few slides, I'm really fortunate to have such an extraordinary team that I work with. The place where we started, though, we looked externally as well as internally. In effect, we engaged in a series of research projects, one of which was to engage a national research team called Hanover Research to project what would likely happen if the closure remained from mid-March all the way through the summer to date. And what we learned from that study informed our summer professional development work. It informed our summer student programs. And it basically gave us expanded information to plan what was primarily a language arts summer program called Bridges to Literacy, which we've had in place for 7 to 8 years. And that served almost 100 students who were at risk of not meeting expectations coming back from a summer slide. What we did was, knowing that there would be far more students who needed that work, we expanded the program threefold. And over the course of this summer, we served approximately 250 to 275 students. So we expanded a program that was for primary literacy only to a program that served K through 5 students in both reading and writing, as well as added a math component, and that came out of this research. Move on to the next slide. In summary, K-12, we developed summer programs for more than 700 students, and the entire team of curriculum directors, Dr. Ladwig and I, and principals were involved in developing the program. The focus on elementary, as I said, we called it a summer extension program because the expansion of the discipline areas from the primary literacy to K-5. And we also ran an E&L program. We ran a K-12 program for our most disabled students. That is the 4th or 5th bullet down, called PHASE. And a credit to our special education team led by Julie Snyder, our director, for putting together a program that was on site and quite successful with a group of students who needed this kind of support. And that also gave us the opportunity to lab and field test a program that is targeted for students who have quite a wide range of both academic and social emotional needs and modifications. We also ran a K-12 program for English language learners. And K-5, we served, I believe, over 50 students in this program to ensure that they didn't fall behind as we move through a very difficult time in the spring and through this summer. In addition, to complement this, we built a website, and a credit to Christian McCourtney, the instructional specialist, Lauren Benjamin, Jen Markarian, Dominique Ciafone, and Stephanie Goldman, as a team, worked with our teachers to take the professional development and the lessons that we're going to talk more about, or you're going to see examples of, and made them available to every family at our elementary program through this web portal. And so that program yielded almost 500 lessons that became the prototype for the work that sets us up for the hybrid learning that we're going to be implementing shortly. Next slide. In order to prepare the organization, Dr. Will talked about starting with curriculum, and there was a point at which it was unimaginable to say, well, we have this incredibly robust curriculum that's been customized and designed around New York State standards. It builds towards international standards of excellence. And to try to do that in a virtual setting, to take what was described to me as a social curriculum and address the needs of a socially distanced learning environment, all of that layered in under conditions that were very much unknown. And as we learned through the summer that we would be heading towards a hybrid model, we continued to look at our curriculum and say, well, what's most essential? What's most essential for learners in reading? What's most essential for learners in writing? What's most essential for learners in mathematics? What are the core fundamentals that we have to retain? And how do we ensure that's built into a curriculum that not only prepares students for a day of live instruction in person, but a synchronous experience that is not an emergency remote situation, but one that is by design. So we restructured our curriculum and developed lessons and built prototypes and field tested it in our summer K-5 extension program. And our teachers really, more than 50 teachers were involved in prototyping these lessons, and they've become expert professional developers and expert instructional designers. And that is the capacity we've built for and prepared for the hybrid model. I'm going to move on to the next slide. The result overall, more than 1,400 registrants have been involved in more than 75 online workshops. That's not just at the elementary alone, that's K-12. At the elementary, approximately 50% of that. We have more than 700 registrants participating in more than 35 or 40 online workshops. And that's not inclusive of all the curriculum work that Dr. Will outlined. We've invested more than 1,000 hours of collaborative curriculum design work throughout the summer. And as I said before, that's resulted in a collection, a set of highly well-designed, carefully designed lessons in reading, writing, and mathematics, almost 80 per grade level. And that's just the starting point for the design process. We've built a system that we think we can replicate and sustain, assuming conditions remain intact. And we build the hybrid model, and you'll hear a little bit more about that hybrid model shortly. And as we said, we used a field testing model that put all of our teachers who were teaching the summer program in an action research mode, collecting feedback and refining the program as we moved forward throughout the summer. Lastly, we just want to take a moment and define our terms. We tend to talk about in this hybrid model, and by the way, hybrid really just means a mix of live instruction, in-person instruction, and online instruction. We, as an organization, have decided that we are using an alternating day model, which the principals will take you through shortly. That is one form of hybrid learning. Districts have chosen a multitude of different forms. Once the hybrid learning model is in place, then we start to design instruction and that instruction is either synchronous or asynchronous. Synchronous is a term that basically refers to something happening in time, in a structure, students and teachers either in person or online in a situation like this, a remote Zoom meeting, a Google Meet. Asynchronous refers to a structured, more self-directed or flipped classroom environment, a video feed, recorded video, a structured lesson, a set of learning experiences that are activating learners, but in a situation that doesn't require them to be in a certain time and place. There's more flexibility. And that's the asynchronous time that will be happening. And we'll be talking about how we've built a model that we think advantages the synchronous and the asynchronous, the in-person and the learning from home.
And you know, I know what some parents are thinking. How is my child actually going to be engaged when nobody's watching? And that's really the bulk of the work that's been done. How do we make this meaningful for kids? I think you're going to hear a lot more about that because, as you know, it is right now it's inevitable that only half the kids can come to school at one time. So we were planning for this. I'm excited to have this shared with you. I think this will give you sort of the big view, and then we're going to get down into the actual day-to-day for kids. Who's taking this one?
I am. Hello, good evening.
Hi, Dennis. Mr. Courtwright, welcome.
So this model shows what it looks like when 50% of the kids are on site in school and when 50% of the kids are learning at home. They will be split into two groups, one called Team Pride, one called Team Husky. And we'll look into the next slide, what happens on Monday, but essentially Team Pride comes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Team Husky, Team Husky comes Wednesdays and Fridays, and everyone will be learning from home on Mondays. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more what that looks like in depth.
You say next slide?
Yep.
There we go, sorry.
Thank you. So Mondays is an opportunity, you know, if you're a third grader, you come to class, you have about 10 to 11 kids, 12 kids in your class, in your cohort that you'll see when you come on site. But there are other students that are part of your class who are at home. And on Mondays, it's an opportunity for the whole class to come together. So they'll come together virtually. They'll have a whole class meeting. It will be social emotional related. It's an opportunity for the teacher to kick off the week, to let kids know what's coming up, what to expect when they come in person, what sort of assignments they're going to be working on, what the goals of the week is. And then after that, about 30-minute meeting, kids will then experience small group instruction. And that small group instruction will be anything from working in book clubs, a phonics lesson, strategy work, independent reading, sort of a reading strategy, or math, if the teacher deems that necessary. And then in the afternoon, kids will have their lunch, they'll have a break, depending on them, and then they'll engage with an encore with PE or art, library media, or music. So that's what they'll have, about 3 virtual sessions with teachers, 3 experiences. And what we think is great about that experience is that it prepares kids in real time what it will look like should we or when we have to go fully remote. They will have had that experience. They'll know what to expect, what it will feel like. So they'll be practicing that. And it also mirrors what happens in the classroom. Typically in an elementary lesson, teachers have a 15 to 20 minute mini lesson, a whole class lesson, and then they break into small groups. So this model pretty much mirrors that as well. Students who receive academic support in either reading or math will also have that built into their day. And any other special ed related services would also be put into that day as well. And
I
in the
think-
afternoon, sorry, as from the teacher side, their teachers will have an opportunity to plan on that day, because this model requires a great deal of planning to plan for the at-home work, for the in-person work, for the students who are virtual. So teachers have an opportunity to collaborate. You know, we never have enough time to plan. There's no such thing as that. But this is an opportunity for teachers to really you know, to have opportunity to plan together. And one of the things that we'll see is that how this time versus what you might have experienced in the spring, is that this time a lot of the work is going to be anchored around big ideas, and they'll be seeing examples of that on something called a learning board.
So the only other thing I want to just highlight, because this has been a question that's emerged. Thank you, Dennis. That was wonderful. I know others have said, why not half days for kids? Why are you bringing the kids virtually on Monday? I think there was an awful lot of consideration as to what would be most effective for young learners. And what we didn't want was, typically it takes 30 minutes or so to get to school, 30 minutes to get home for what would essentially amount to 2.5 hours of instruction. When we looked at the model, we felt one of the best ways to normalize the experience for kids was to have them in school for a longer period of time to feel what a real school day feels like. And one of the things that I thought was a very interesting shift here, that this came very late in the thinking, was to bring the entire class, both cohorts, together for at least one moment on that Monday. So I think the model addresses what we think is most developmentally appropriate. No one is saying that this is perfect, nor do we believe this is ideal for kindergartners. This is as good as we think we can make it under the circumstances that we have. And I promise you, folks, I know everybody has their own opinions, and they're certainly considered, but we looked at all kinds of variables before this was the model that the team ultimately felt was the most effective, including making sure that teachers could sustain and do the quality of work that we all want them to do. So, Mrs. Himes, I think this is you, am I right?
I'm first. We have to go back.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gutterman, my apologies.
Yep, that's okay. If you go back a slide.
Back a slide.
Yeah, there's a lot on that slide to cover. So I'm going to talk about the on-site days. But before I do that, I think it's important to point out that Tuesday through Friday, you'll note in the leftmost boxes, it has a letter day. You'll see Tuesday says Learning from Home A Day, Wednesday on-site learning A Day, and then a B Day and a B Day. That is to maintain the encore rotation for students. We know that that's important, and it's going to be an important part of their experience when they're on site, that they have that encore. So we have consecutive letter days so that each cohort will get a chance to experience an encore. So for example, if this is a Husky schedule and you're learning from home on Tuesday and you have art on an A day, at 12:30 you have a pre-recorded art lesson that is prepared by your art teacher that connects to the content that you're studying in school. On Wednesday, when you're on site, you'll see your encore will be art, and you'll have the live session that connects to the pre-recorded. And then you'll go to another encore on B Day, could be PE. Next Tuesday, the week after this, and Wednesday, we go to C Day, then D Day, and then rotate through. So I think it's important to know that's how that will be set up. For the on-site days, we talked about arrival and dismissal and a bit about lunch and recess, but we were really mindful about, in an unfamiliar experience, to create as much of a familiar experience for students as was possible. So we really wanted to create what they knew. So you'll see, if you look through the day, on Wednesday, morning meeting, they'll have their reading workshop, writing workshop, they'll have a word studying snack. The snack can become a mass break. Kids go outside, be socially distant, have a mass break where they have their snack, their encore, lunch and recess. And I think it's important to remind everyone, lunch and recess is monitored by staff members who will be able to help students maintain social distancing and support them. They'll come back in the afternoon, they will have math, they'll have a science or a social studies block, and at the end of the day, they'll have an IE or a small group time. So it really maintains what students have had all along in a traditional way as best we can.
As a point of clarification, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, the white represents asynchronous time, and the pink represents synchronous time or instruction that would be either in person or online.
That is correct. So on an on-site day, the whole day is pink because students are there. And on an asynchronous day or a virtual day, the pink boxes indicate a synchronous session.
I think that's an excellent point. And Adam, I thank you for doing that, because I think it also reminds people that even when kids are not physically on site, there will be real-time teaching occurring on many different touch points. That's excellent. Thank you. Mrs. Himes, is this you? I apologize if I got ahead of myself there.
That's okay. So let me first start by acknowledging that we know that the spring was really tough at home in terms of the learning from home piece. It was hard for students. It was certainly hard for you as parents because it required a lot of you, and it was hard for the teachers as well. Because of that, and because of what we learned from that, we spent, as my colleagues have mentioned, the bulk of our summer and the last 4 months building what we think is a rigorous, enriching learning from home experience. We had a team of over 40 teachers over the summer work with our administrative team to develop these lessons. You're going to see some really specific examples of what you can expect your child to be doing at home in a couple of minutes from my colleagues. So we did spend the bulk of the summer on this. Our youngest students, to be honest, will still need some help from somebody at home in terms of getting on to the technology. But the content that we built in, we think allows for more independence, which we want for our kids, and will also keep them engaged throughout the day, and will keep them on a schedule. One of the things that we knew that was really important to you, and that was also important to us, it was hard in the spring on the days that kids did not see their teachers, their classroom teachers. We have built in a time during the day. This may happen before, after, or during the school day. Even when your child is at home, your child's classroom teacher will be seeing the other 50% of the class once during the day that your child is learning from home. The content of these meetings could be, it could be review, it could be new teaching. Teachers can make sure that kids understand their assignments. And again, one of the benefits that we have this year that we did not have last year is that your child will be with his or her teacher in school to learn how to learn from home. Every time your child is learning from home, they will have just been in school the day before with their teacher, and the teacher will have the opportunity to set them up well for what they will be doing at home the next day. The time that your child will see your his or her teacher on the learning from home days will be scheduled, and it will be predictable, and you will know when that is going to happen. In addition to seeing your child's teacher, students will receive synchronous academic intervention, special education services, speech, occupational therapy, counseling. 4th and 5th grade students will also be getting their synchronous orchestra or band lessons on those days. Oh, I'm sorry, and just one more thing. All students in every grade level will receive a device, iPads for kindergarten through 2nd grade, Chromebooks for grades 3 through 5. Those devices will travel with the student. They will have their own, they will not be sharing.
Yeah, and there was a question, if I have more than one child, you will receive a device for each of your children. So thank you. That's a very comprehensive overview of the various kinds of experiences kids will be having when they're learning from home. If I'm not mistaken, the next slide belongs to Ms. Goldman. Is that correct? So before Stephanie comes on, you know, I'd like to introduce members of the team to you. You've met our principals, and there are certain things that make us extremely proud. So Stephanie was a remarkable teacher in her own right at Parsons School. Then she was an instructional coach. Then she became an assistant principal, She fills multiple roles. She's the director of the tech program at Harrison High School. If your children had a successful graduation, you can thank the woman in that square. She made that entire thing happen. But she is an instructional expert, and you will meet many of them tonight. And we are just so proud of all the contributions she has made. She's going to tell you some of the work that's been going on this summer with teachers, which has been impressive and comprehensive. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Dr. Will. Thank you. So you heard from each of the principals a little bit about what it would feel like for students, but I wanted to take you through a little bit more briefly, but more specific to what a child would feel in the hybrid model. So if I'm home as a student, I start my day with a morning meeting with a whole class. It may be part of my class depending on how my teacher decides to structure the day, but this will occur every single Monday. I'll be possibly greeting my friends, sharing something important in my life, reading a short message that my teacher wrote for me to practice a social skill or an academic skill. There may be asynchronous lessons that will be all experiencing new content for me as a child. I will be listening to a teacher read a book and teach me a new strategy, using a mentor text to look at authors' crafts in writing workshop, and learning about something maybe like utilizing fractions in real-world settings. And even though I'm home, I'm reading, writing, and doing math with all new content daily. I'm gonna have independent time to read, practice skills. It might be on Dreambox, it might be on RazKids. I'll have time to write a response to a book that my teacher might have read or one that I read independently. And this will help me practice and deepen my understanding of the new content. I'll also have an encore, which will be music, art, library, physical education on the 2 days I'm home, asynchronously. But on Mondays, it will be a synchronous lesson with one of those teachers. So I might actually see my art teacher with all of my friends in class, learning about making lines or learning about a composer in music class. And as a student, I'll also have time for small group instruction. So that may be with an AIS teacher, reading or math support. It may be, if I'm a 4th or 5th grader in band or orchestra, having a lesson, learning how to play my instrument. Or it may be with a related service provider, such as seeing my speech teacher and my friends that go to speech with me. On other days, when I'm at school, I'll also have a morning meeting in the same way with half of my class, because the rest of my classmates are at home, and it'll look exactly the same, and it would just be in person with my teacher and my friends. I will then experience time with my classroom with new content, just like I would at home. This time, my teacher would be reading and doing reading workshop and writing workshop right in front of me in the classroom. And I'll have time to stop and think, write on Post-its, talk about characters or the theme of a book. In math workshop, I'll be working on new content. Same with science and social studies. Maybe I'll be creating a project on learning of New York State or looking at the shadows of the sun outside during science class. And I'll have time to work in small groups with my teacher, meet one-on-one to talk about new learning and practice skills that I need support with. And I'll work independently to make sure that I have the critical thinking skills and problem solving. And I'll also have an encore, which is going to be in the art room, the library, the gymnasium. And I'll work with a teacher and my friends on different projects and go to lunch and have recess with my friends as well. And while it might feel a little bit different as a student being home rather than at school, I'm learning all new content throughout the day, which is an important piece. And I'll have access to different learning dashboards. And with that, Christian McCourtney and the instructional specialist team will explain a bit more about the content, about the asynchronous learning, and how it all fits within the hybrid model.
Thank you. And that was a great job, Steph. But before Christy gets started, I just want to address a couple of questions. I think they're timely. We will be explaining the hybrid model soon and the virtual model. It's a recurring theme. But in simple terms, there's no difference in the schedule. So you'll be assigned to a group, and your child, if they're learning from home, will Zoom into that group or use Google Classroom, as we're doing now, and participate in that class. When the children are home, your child will be learning from home just as everybody else is. We'll talk more about that in detail, I promise. And I just want to clarify a question about the kindergarten orientation that perhaps wasn't clearly stated. Kindergartners will have an orientation on the first day of school. Teachers are creating an experience that will not only entice them, but give them time to acclimate. What we're not doing is what we've typically done in the past, which is bring parents in. Unfortunately, that's not an option that we can explore right now, but we are very mindful. And we didn't want to bring the kids early because they're kindergartners. Let's get that break point one time, nurture those children through that experience, and make sure everybody's ready to receive them. So at this point, we're going to continue to look at the work that we have done to prepare so that your children will have a positive experience. Mr. McCourtney, I'm excited to hear this. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Dr. Wool, and thank you, Stephanie. Our instructional team at the elementary level knew going into the summer that our priority would be to enhance our virtual learning platform. As it pertains to asynchronous work, we really zeroed in on wanting to increase student independence and increase engagement. So how did we do that? We gathered a team of about 50 teachers, and about half of them developed high quality asynchronous work after experiencing 10 hours of professional development targeting that exact topic. We're thankful for those teachers, not only because of the production and the work that they put out, but because of how they helped us to understand best practices in this new world through their experiences. Additionally, the other half of those 50 teachers were practitioners in the field through our summer extension program, and they provided us with useful feedback as they use the asynchronous learning tools to enhance student learning along the way. An outcome of this work is what you see before you on this image. This is one of our learning boards, and this is a 5th grade example that would exist for a cohort, our cohorts of students that were learning from home on, let's say, Tuesday and Wednesday. They would access the lesson by clicking on the images on the top portion of the board, and then access the independent tasks that are located at the bottom portion of the board. One of the pieces of feedback that was useful to us from the summer extension program, and that we will make an adjustment for, is to make the access of our independent tasks more user-friendly. What we also see in this learning board is that students of all ages will have a one-stop shopping experience. No longer will we be scrolling through complicated and filled Seesaw pages and Google Classroom pages to access our learning for the day. We will find it neatly within these boards on the times that we're at home. Could you show the next slide, please, Dr. Wool?
Yes, and I'm hoping I remembered to activate the sound. If I didn't, I may have to back out and try it again.
You may be able to do so through your View Options tab as well, as a potential. So other experiences that students will have when they're learning from home is an independent reading assignment, which could be attached to our RAS Kids virtual reading platform, which gives students an opportunity to read books that exist virtually. They may also see a reading response related to their independent reading that they'll figure out. And every day, students will have access to the highly acclaimed and Harvard research Dreambox program, who've partnered with us both at the beginning of the school release last year in March and continue with us K-6 this year. Next slide, please.
All righty.
So one of the things that we wanted to consider as a team was how could we make this learning continuous for students that were going to be in school on alternating days? And the way that we addressed that was to determine a weekly goal, which also helped us essentialize the learning for the year. As you can see, this learning goal for the week is that I can determine the main idea of the text. This is a 5th grade goal. And each day, students will experience learning targets that move them towards that goal. When students are in person, teachers will have the professional discretion to be able to determine whether or not they need to reteach an idea that was introduced asynchronously, or to move the students forward because they've demonstrated that they're ready for that. Our teachers are excellent at formative assessment and knowing what our students need. They also are freed up to do that work, having the asynchronous learning planned for and provided by our curriculum writing team. So go ahead, Dr. Wool, we can introduce the next slide. And with that, I'd like to introduce some invaluable members of our instructional team. Those are Lauren Benjamin, Jen Markarian, and Dominique Chaffon, who are our instructional specialists, and their thumbprints are all over this work, as well as the dedicated teachers that we had along our curriculum writing team. So Lauren, if you could please introduce this next video clip, and hopefully it will be audible.
Thank you, Mr. McCourtney. We learned this past spring and summer for our ELA asynchronous lessons that we needed to increase the quality and the quantity of opportunities for student engagement in these pre-recorded lessons. In this video, you'll notice how our 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Aranella, prominently displays the learning target at the beginning of a lesson. This helps students to get their minds ready for the learning within the lesson and provides a visual reminder of the focused learning. Also, she addresses the students as if she's sitting next to them and speaking to them in a casual and yet informative tone. You'll also notice that there are frequent pausing points with embedded formative assessments. These assessments are used for either future asynchronous lessons or ongoing small group instruction so that we can really target the needs of the students that sit before us.
I apologize, I'm having a little technical difficulty here.
Okay, well, we'll
Can
see.
you hear that audio?
No.
Not clearly.
No. Can you try resharing the slides?
I can. Apologize for those of you watching at home. We thought we had this licked. Resharing, what do you want me to do?
Share your screen, I think, is that
Yeah, I thought I got out of the share screen mode and it's not.
Okay, I'm going to try to do that.
Maybe you can take the audio over because I can't seem to fix it here.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. Give me a moment.
Yeah. It's slide 35.
Thank you.
This is what teachers will be facing every day when they're in class. I apologize. We had a little technical glitch with my audio, but we'll fix it in 1 second. As Lauren was saying, what you're going to learn about is the kind of work that went on this summer. This is an example of what it will feel like when your child goes home, is working independently, and has this incredible tool that we put together where they can literally log into a learning board and follow up on particular lessons. This one happens to be led by Mrs. Aranella, 5th grade at Preston School. Thank you, Michael.
I hope I got it. Here we go. No, we don't.
Hi, 5th grade readers. Today we are going to continue our journey reading Stopping Animal Invaders. And as we do, we are going to determine the similarities of 2 sections to gain a deeper understanding of the overall message. But before
Anybody that thinks virtual learning is easy, this is a good object lesson.
Michael, we lost audio, perhaps when you put your mic on mute. I'm not sure.
it too is spreading throughout Florida. So I want you to take a minute and answer this question. What are the similarities between this section of the fierce invader and big snakes, big problems? So when I think about the 2 animals again, they both have people creating programs to help reduce their numbers. And also, they've had success.
We'll try one more time.
Hi, 5th grade readers. Today we are going to continue our journey reading Stopping Animal Invaders. And as we do, we are going to determine the similarities of two sections to gain a deeper understanding of the overall message. But before we can do that and find what the Burmese python and this cane toad have in common, we need to remember, what do we know about the Burmese pythons from yesterday? This year, it says the Australian government fears that the cane toad will continue to increase its range in Australia. So they're worried that they are going to continue to spread into other areas. And this is very similar to the Burmese python because it too is spreading throughout Florida. So I want you to take a minute and answer this question. What are the similarities between this section of the fierce invader and big snakes, big problems? So when I think about the two animals again, they both have people creating programs to help reduce their numbers. And also, they've had success reducing population over the years. But they do still continue to be a problem in the future. So, how does the information in these two sections add or change your thinking from yesterday?
Lauren, I'm sorry, Jen Markarian, I'd like to introduce you to close out this part of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. We thank you for your patience. Here we see this teacher explicitly modeling her thinking, purposefully pausing, posing targeted questions with lots of opportunities for students to interact with the text, really employing many of the best practices we've always prioritized. Our teachers have carefully crafted each lesson to engage students, focusing on high leverage goals that will benefit their overall growth as learners.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Lauren and Jen. And what may have gotten lost in the shuffle there is how challenging it is to continue to have students engaged in an asynchronous learning experience when teachers aren't able to use their toolbox to continually redirect students and maintain their attention. These teachers have done an exceptional job of creating pausing points for students to interact with the learning along the way. Here to introduce what this will look like in mathematics will be Dominique. As you can see from this week at a glance, the overall weekly learning goal is that I can subtract numbers within 20 using multiple strategies. Each one of the learning targets, again, moves students towards that weekly goal. And again, teachers will have some discretion as to whether or not they reteach, pre-teach, or move students along that continuum. Dominique, can you show us, please, and introduce, please, a clip that will help us see exactly what it looks like on a singular day? And next slide, please, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. McCourtney. Thank you, Dr. Wool. Good evening, everyone. So teachers have designed asynchronous lessons using a mathematical framework that leverages engagement. So in this video, the teacher will begin the lesson by presenting an open-ended task to spark students' curiosity. By open-ended, we mean that there's more than one possible solution. This serves as an excellent way to capture the attention of all learners. The teacher will then anticipate a variety of student responses, which will validate students' thinking and highlight a variety of strategies about a given concept. Finally, the teacher will demonstrate how she guides the instruction towards the learning target for that day. And Dr. Wool, if you could play the video.
Actually, Mr. Greenfield's driving the bus now. He'll play the video. I thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, you've put me in charge of the steering wheel. And that's what happens.
There we go.
Welcome back to Math with Miss Kilminster. Let's get started with our problem of the day. Magic fingers up and magic. Here's our problem of the day today. We're gonna look at this picture again. But this time, Robin is gonna fly away. Well, can you Pause me and tell somebody in the room using math language about this picture with Robin flying away. Pause me. Are you back? Here's one way that you can tell the story of these superheroes. There were 7 superheroes hanging out. 1 flew away. 6 were left. That's one way that you could talk about this using math language. You could also say that the 1 that flew away was a smaller group than the 6 that stayed. There's so many ways to talk about pictures using math, and I love to hear all of your big math words. Great job. Today as mathematicians, I can subtract by drawing a picture.
So as you can see, this is a first grade example. The teacher's taking into account the audience. She speaks to the students in a way that excites our youngest learners and engages them in the learning process. Additionally, she provides multiple opportunities for students to interact with the lesson. And similar to our approach in literacy, teachers are employing methods of best practice in the classroom, and they're using them to create engaging, student-centered virtual experiences in mathematics for students.
Hey, can we pause there to all the glitches aside? I just want to think for a minute with the audience how much time and effort went into that teacher creating that lesson, because it certainly builds upon prior knowledge. It requires that she knows her audience. It requires that she use technology. We were talking earlier with the instructional coaches, and in general, it takes about 4 times as long to create these kinds of lessons, which speaks to why it was so critically important for the summer work to occur so that there is a reservoir of these lessons already created. Just wonderful work, and I can't help but smiling. If you don't know this teacher, Rebecca, she is just incredible. She jumps off the page. I don't know about the audience being first graders, but I was engaged, Dominique, so thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, Jen, and Dominique.
Next slide there, Michael. So I'd like to introduce a young man who's had an extraordinary impact on our school district since his arrival 4 years ago. Our athletic director, Chris Galano, has made physical education an incredibly rich experience, one that really prioritizes well-being and the social emotional well-being of students. There's a wonderful story embedded in this slide of how he has worked with our director of special education and partnered with the psychologists in our district to make physical education more meaningful. And he's going to share with you some of the innovations that he and his department have worked on to prepare the physical education program for the upcoming school year. Chris?
Thanks, Dr. Wool. I don't have any interesting moving objects like the previous slide, but hopefully I'm somewhat engaging. So a little bit about PE experience for your child. Different from the classroom, the state is mandating that we have a 12-foot social distancing when there's aerobic activity. That is any time there's heavy breathing or movement. So we will adhere to that. We also took a lot of time over the summer to look at our curriculum to limit the use of equipment and or sharing of equipment. For obvious reasons with the virus, we are looking to minimize all of that, in phys ed. During the synchronous time, which you'll see on the left side of the screen, our emphasis is activity time. Obviously, we want your kids moving. When we have them in the gymnasium or outside, which we are going to emphasize getting outside as much as possible, our emphasis is going to be around activity. We want your kids moving, learning, interacting, just like Ms. Himes said. Just because of the social distancing doesn't mean we cannot have, enjoy, learn, and communicate. Some of the units that they'll touch upon, just like the other subjects, we had to essentialize our entire curriculum. A lot of what we had to essentialize was looking at the curriculum and seeing which activities and which lessons and what skills we want to teach and that could adhere to the 12-foot social distancing protocol. Some of this will be dance, fitness, track and field, locomotor movement patterns. But we also put a premium, and I was actually on the phone today with one of our teachers, Rita Beardsley, who I think is on this call as a parent and a teacher, who was already thinking about ways of including more about social emotional learning and how to care for our kids. So on the asynchronous day, you'll see the major difference from the spring is that the asynchronous day will be directly linked to the synchronous learning. So there won't be a disconnect. So it may be a preview or a practice depth of understanding. So whatever went on during the synchronous learning when they were in front of the teacher in the gymnasium or outside, the asynchronous lesson, which will be the day before or day after, will be directly linked to it. That may look like a mini assignment, journals and reflections, engaging video clips like we just saw, recorded mini lessons, shared articles, fitness logs. And this is really just to build off the synchronous lesson and help the students better understand and be more mindful of what their bodies and minds are doing. As Dr. Wool said, we are taking leadership role in the social and emotional learning aspect of the world. We believe, and all phys ed teachers, and Valerie Himes again said, we have one of the best phys ed departments. I would say we have the best phys ed department definitely in the state, and I would put them up against the nation. They are constantly looking for ways to engage your children, not only physically, but more of the emotional side, building relationships, understanding the kids, being an outlet to your child. It is so important that our teachers do this because obviously, especially in a time like now, kids need outlets. They need adults to, look to talk to bounce ideas off of. And our PE department, and one of the goals that I had when I got here was to really create that environment in our PE classes. On the bottom of the slide in asynchronous learning, our PE teachers partnered with the school psychologists, and right now 6 through 8 we're piloting a program. Obviously it's not in the elementary level yet, but where we're taking recorded lessons so that the school psychologist and the PE teacher will record a lesson together, really working on social emotional learning, self-regulating skills, how to work through issues, how to express their anger or anxiety or depression. And obviously with all the research stating that kids' anxiety and depression is rising, we feel that PE is at a premium, and the district and my fellow colleagues definitely agreed. And at no point was this a class that was going to be put to the side. It was, they from the day one, we're looking how we can get kids more active in a safe manner. So I do appreciate that, and district supporting that. So for that, that's the PE aspect for your children. Again, always in phys ed, we're priority is safety. We're moving around. Our teachers are highly skilled and highly certified to understand safety, and obviously we'll be adding in the 12-foot social distancing. Some of the questions I saw pertaining to PE, as of right now, we'll be wearing masks during PE, and even if they're at the 12-foot social distancing. Obviously, we will take that into consideration when we are doing different activities to ensure that there's no, breathing issues or anything like that. But again, our department, our K-5 department, is next week going to take on, looking at how to provide even more engaging lessons and pre-recorded lessons. So we're excited. I think it'll be a very different experience than what you felt in the spring. Our teachers did magnificent work, but obviously, like Dr. Wool said, we started. Dr. Wool started talking about September at the end of last year, which we thought was crazy, but now we understand why. So we will be well prepared. Your kids will enjoy it, and please use me as an outlet. If you ever have a question or you have something that you want to ask, please reach out to me. My email's on the website, and also your PE teacher. If it's something that's social or emotional, use them as an outlet as well as the mental health team. So thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And I know some of you are asking questions. Right now, interscholastic sports are still on hold. We will know more as September unfolds. I'm smiling because one of you said, Dr. Wool, you should have checked the audio button when you started your share screen. I absolutely should have, but I forgot. So that's how we screwed that up. A couple of other questions in the chat box. I just want to ask that everybody keep monitoring those so we can make sure that if there's an appropriate time to offer an answer, we can. There's a question that keeps occurring about siblings. Let me just mention it briefly. If you have siblings in the elementary school, you do not need to request that they be on the same day. They will be on the same day, but you will be getting a survey pretty soon, probably sometime on Friday. And just to make everybody's anxiety level go down, we'll put in there, if you don't want your siblings on the same day, you can let us know. Unfortunately, the middle school, high school follow the same schedule, but the elementary is on a different day. So if you have kids in the middle and high school and their siblings, they will also automatically be on the same day. But if you don't want them, you'd have to request that they not. There are a couple of questions about what are your options if you choose the virtual. I promise we're going to get to that in depth. So just stay tuned. And there are also a couple of questions open about English language learners. There are a whole bunch of answers in there as well. Can any one of the four of you give us a prediction as to when people will be hearing about their assignments?
We're all putting final touches on all of that, and that should be coming in the next couple of days. So finishing touches on that, they could look for them very soon.
Thank you, Mark, because as everybody knows, childcare is so imperative for
Most
people
certainly.
to be able to plan for. And you know that well.
Yes, we do.
So who's going to handle this? Is Stephanie going to take this?
I'll stay on and continue
Mark.
on
Okay, perfect.
around this.
Thank you.
And actually, as we talk about the fine and performing arts in elementary school, I think you'll hear some common themes, as my colleague, Mr. Galano, just shared in regards to physical education. But first, I'd like to start by saying throughout the conversation, I heard a couple of phrases already this evening, such as opportunities to connect, feel like in school, and being part of a community. And having the opportunity for students to be able to engage in their music class, their art classes, physical education, and library classes outside of the core academic subjects, we all believe is so important to continue their growth in a variety of social and emotional ways and allow our students to explore a variety of types of learning for them. So we're happy that we are continuing to offer each of these aspects, both in person when students are on site, as well as when they're learning from home. They will continue on as physical education on a rotating schedule. As Mr. Galano mentioned around physical education, as you can imagine, there are a number of health and safety things that we have to take into consideration. Certainly, there will be little to no sharing of materials and items such as that in both art and music classes, and we're coming up with different processes so that we can create different processes and structures for our students to utilize their own personalized supplies and materials that are specifically identified for them. And very early in the conversation, Ms. Meduno shared about the paper desk coverings that will also be utilized during those times. So as I said, both general music and art will be taking place once a cycle for all of our students, K to 5, both in school as well as asynchronously. And during the on-site learning, we are going to be very focused on students being immediately on task in their learning activities and keeping our students highly engaged. The art curriculum and music curriculum, the departments both looked at how to essentialize the content and curriculum so that they can get the most work done with their students and engage them in the highest way possible. That asynchronous learning that'll be taking place, just like in physical education, will continue to build upon the days where students are learning in school. It could be a preview of something coming up in the next day. It could be a review of something that students just learned about, or continuing practice of a variety of skills that they were practicing throughout their classes. As far as orchestra and band is concerned, for our 4th and 5th grade students at the elementary level, it will be taking place in small group instruction lessons through remote synchronous instruction with their teacher on the days that they are learning from home at this time. So those band and orchestra lessons will be continuing virtually with their teachers on learning from home days.
Thank you, Mark. And we are looking into ways, if we can find safe ways for the kids to participate in band on site, we will continue to seek that kind of advice. We haven't found any comprehensive research yet that lets us feel comfortable doing that. I also want to say that we prioritized class time during the days that kids are learning in school. So there are virtually no pullouts of any kind, with rare exceptions for resource room and special education. So that may have been said before, but I want to remind you, when we typically do certain kinds of experiences, we would take kids out of the class. We're not doing that. When they're in school, they're in their core academic experiences unless they're in their encore classes. So thank you. I guess next slide, Michael. So this might help a little bit to define the two options. I think you'll understand more as we go through the presentation. So the hybrid, by our determination, the research that we did, this is something we think is critically important for teachers to be successful. It has to be smaller group, obviously in person, and the instruction occurs on alternating days. The kids are always socially distanced, but it does give teacher-student interaction a premium. Obviously, it's easier to interact when you're seeing people in front of you in real time. In that model, there's also virtual, which you just experienced, asynchronous instruction on the alternating days, with lots of opportunities for check-ins on those asynchronous days. So it's not all one thing or the other. And if you go back to the slide, these slides will be posted tomorrow, and you look at the areas that are pink, those are examples where your kids will have live interactions while they're learning from home. If you choose the virtual option, on the days that children are in class, you will have the opportunity to remote into that class. You will not see other kids. That was a question in the chat. You will see the teacher, and the teacher will see you similarly to you seeing me right now. When we are projecting electronic information, your kids will see it in the same model that they're seeing it right now. If it's on a smart board, they'll see it on their screen. The teacher-student interaction obviously is somewhat more limited in the virtual environment. You know, a teacher in real time can reorganize kids based on questions, more challenging. So there'll be a somewhat more independent experience, although as we get better at it, I think it will improve over time. The virtual asynchronous instruction is exactly the same as what the kids are experiencing in the hybrid model. Remember, when we went all the way back to the beginning of this presentation, we designed this model so if we go fully virtual, the kids stay in the same group, their teachers remain the same, and their schedule is unchanged. That's, I think, one of the strengths of what we've tried to do, is anticipate the likely up and down that's going to occur. Next slide, Michael, please. Thank you. Mrs. Malloy-Mangan, did you want to say something?
No, thank you, sorry.
Michael, would you like to explain what we know thus far about how the technology will support virtual learning?
Absolutely. So we've done research to determine what would be the most streamlined way and the most efficient and effective way to set up classrooms for remote learning. And the method that we think is most effective is we will have a high quality webcam in every classroom, set up to pretty seamlessly be able to allow students to Zoom in to the classroom on the days that they are assigned to their cohort. So the camera will have a field of view that shows the teacher and the instructional space. Now, we know that elementary classrooms are designed in such a way to maximize student social engagement, and of course we're taking that into account. But the camera will show the teacher, it'll show the screen, and students will be able to zoom in through the and see what's being projected on the smartboard, or would be projected as an activity on an electronic whiteboard.
And there are lots of questions being posed about this. How will assignments be submitted primarily virtually for the kids that are learning virtually? But to be very honest, we're still fine-tuning this model. So we, as Michael mentioned, we had 1,400 registrants in our summer professional development. What we're doing is now we're putting together another group of expert teachers who will be field testing this equipment and the circumstances under which this occurs before school opens. So there may be other changes. It'll only get better. That it won't get anything less than what we're talking to you about, but we want to make this as meaningful as we possibly can and as sustainable. I need to keep reminding folks, this is a tremendous weight for teachers to carry, and we all need to be mindful of how to support them by making our expectations realistic and giving them the seamless integration tools that they need, and we're working on that. Promise you that.
On that note,
Dr. Wolf, I'm sorry, Michael, I just wanted to add one thing. A question that came up about this last night. Parents had questions about whether their students would be able to see the teacher at all times. And the answer to that was no.
That's right.
Because if the teacher moves outside of the view, the camera is not going to be following the teacher. It will also, but not be showing the other students in the class. And there also was a question, I think yesterday, and I'm certain this is the same at the elementary model, but it is not the case that school is being recorded. These classes, we're in the same way, in the way that we're recording this webinar now and posting it on the district website, teachers will not be recording their classes and posting it anywhere. So I wanted to just make that clear. That was a little confusing, I think, last night.
That's right. And teachers often, as you just saw, create videos in a certain environment. The general classroom setting will not be that environment. Next slide. So this will answer some of your questions, ladies and gentlemen, I hope. So we want to make this manageable for teachers. So students, once you make your decision, you have to remain virtual for at least the first trimester in elementary school, basically the end of the first marking period. Placement changes will only occur at that transition point. Students who participate virtually, and you can think about why this is important to teachers, are expected to have their cameras on and be visible to the teacher, because the teacher wants to try to gauge a student's engagement and also make sure that the student is okay and is there and is participating. Students will follow the same schedule of whatever group they're in. And I need to remind people that if we say 12 in a section, it could be 8 in the classroom and 4 at home, because at some point when we go fully virtual, we don't want anybody to be displaced. That class will always be intact in one way or another. And if it's fully virtual, quite frankly, it's easier for the teacher to manage in one environment as opposed to 2. And Mrs. Markarian, I know you could speak to that based on some of the experiences you had this summer.
Yes, so just considering our work this summer was with teachers fully virtual. So we conducted many workshops, as was spoken about earlier, and teachers participated fully in these workshops in the locations they were in. They were at times completely in contact with the entire group. They also were in breakout sessions where they worked in partnerships, just as we would have students do, or in small groups where they worked, where they recorded their work, they came back and they presented that to the whole group, very similarly to what we would do in our classroom and what we have been doing for years in our classroom, just in person. So when we consider being virtual in this model, then we need to also consider students in our classroom, but also on the computer screen. So diverting attention to both. So that's an additional consideration, is being able to prioritize the students that are in front of you in the class, but also prioritize the students that are at home, and how will they be able to participate in a similar active way as the students that are in front of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.
Lou, we may just want to make note and acknowledge that while placement changes will only be made on the whole at a trimester, we certainly understand that there will be circumstances under which students will be able to Zoom in, and that will be determined at the building level with the principal and or teachers based on special circumstances.
Of course, and there were a bunch of questions that I answered earlier. I'll just revisit some of them. Somebody said if a student is quarantined, can they Zoom into the classroom? My answer to that question is of course. We want to make this work for kids. We want to make sure that if a child is, through no fault of their own, unable to attend school because they find themselves in this circumstance, they're going to be included in any way that we can. Also, I should say there's a question about wireless mics. The more equipment we start moving around, the more difficult it is for teachers to manage. Mr. Seligman, who had to leave, unfortunately, found a webcam that has a very strong, powerful mic, and there's a corridor that we've identified for the front of the room that socially distances the teacher for the entire lesson if they choose to stay there. Remember, they're wearing masks, so they can move around the room because everybody's wearing masks. But the mic can pick up the teacher and the students from anywhere in that area.
Right. He's tested it, and we have confidence that this is the most streamlined and the best and most effective tool that we have available en masse to put in every classroom.
Yeah, I'm going to run through a couple of other quick questions as well. Our classes are never created alphabetically. That's not the way we do it. The principals spend inordinate amounts of time listening to teacher input, listening to parent input, and trying to create classes that are thoughtfully constructed so that everyone has the best possible experience. They've used that same model to construct the classes that your children will be in, whether it's hybrid or virtual. And this is an important section because there are lots of questions about what about kids who have great need that need to be in school more? We have tried to consider every possible scenario that best serves the broad continuum of children and their needs. So this is a summary slide. You'll hear more in detail. These are the kids that will be in school for 4 or 5 days. I'm going to let our Director of Special Education, Julie Snyder, walk you through both this slide and the following slides. Julie, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, so we've received guidance, and I think it really makes good sense that our most vulnerable students, and we have defined those as students with disabilities and self-contained, or what we call special class programs with very intensive needs. Those are the students who were on site in person. So we are able to accommodate them in person every day, as well as our English language learners. Can you hear me? My internet is a little...
It's like you're going up and down.
As well as our... All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. As well as our English language learners who are entering and emerging. Those are different levels of language acquisition. We are able to accommodate them 4 of the days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Tuesday through Friday at the elementary level. We're going to talk a little bit more. So this again reiterates that our English language learners that are entering and emerging will attend school Tuesday through Friday at the elementary level. Our transitioning and expanding students, and again, these are different levels of language proficiency, will attend school in person 2 days a week. Similar.
Julia is frozen, so I'm gonna take over for the moment. So what we are talking about here is the entering and emerging, transitioning and expanding. Are you back, Julie? Yeah, you're fading in and out. So why don't you hold till we finish the slide?
Yeah, so Jen Toscano, our supervisor, is online, and I'm gonna switch my spot.
Okay, but before we do, let's just go back one slide, Michael. Maybe the elementary principals want to weigh in.
Mark is prepared to talk about the language learning.
I think it's important for us to just explain to people what those terms mean and why those decisions were made. So thank you.
Mr. Wood?
Of course, I'm happy to jump in here. As we know and well documented, we have a very diverse and very successful elementary E&L program throughout each of our 4 schools. And we also know from years and years of research throughout the field that language immersion is critical to students learning English as a new language. And to that end, students who are identified as entering and emerging students by the state, there are the students who are at the most beginning levels of their language acquisition and their process. So we're creating an opportunity for these students to come to school 4 days a week, as Ms. Snyder was sharing. They'll be on site in school on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And on Monday, they'll be learning at home with their peers. We have other E&L students who are a little bit further along in their English language acquisition. And they might be classified as transitioning or expanding students. And those students will be coming to school 2 days a week with their cohort, whether it's the Pride or the Husky cohort. Regardless of that classification, all of our students who are E&L students we're creating opportunities for them to receive targeted support from their classroom teachers, as well as our highly talented E&L staff. So we're working to support all of our students in that way.
Thank you, Mark. That's well said. And we're very proud of our E&L program. They had tremendous success this summer, and they continue to show some really dynamic thinking as a department. Next slide, Michael, please. So there is so much that's gone into making these special education students feel as if their program is personally tailored to their individual needs, because as you can imagine, each one of these kids has unique circumstances. And I'm very excited that Jen's going to take us through what we're doing with our special education population at the elementary level. Hi, Jen.
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Wall. So as Julie mentioned previously, the students in our special classes, that's our 12-1-2 classes, our 8-1-2 classes, and our phase classes, will attend in person for in-person instruction daily. Our students in our general education classes, those are students who participate in our integrated co-teaching program, resource room, consultant teacher services, or students who just receive related services, will attend school according to their assigned team, their Husky or their Pride schedule. Synchronous related services will be provided for special education students. So that's your speech, your OT, your counseling, your PT. Synchronous defined as live interaction, whether that be in person or via a Zoom. It will be a live session based on what's recommended on their IEP as per the services. We will continue to hold all of our CSC, our Committee on Special Education meetings, and Section 504 meetings via Google Meet or Zoom. And all of our CSE evaluations will continue according to the Part 200 regulations, and we will be continuing to monitor or provide safety measures as we're doing that as well. We did a number of evaluations this summer and a number of meetings this summer where we had specific safety protocols lined up as well.
And I would just...
Julie, can you just talk about the success we had this summer? Because I think it's indicative of, we have a pretty good sense of what is working with the 12-month students. I think might be important for parents to hear about it.
Yeah, and I was... Hopefully my Zoom is more stable. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we had, for 6 weeks, we had our students in person, both at the elementary level. We ran 4 classes, 2 at the elementary and 2 at the high school level, combination of students in grades K through 12. Again, more intensive needs. We provided all of the related services. We increased, some of our students had difficulty wearing and tolerating masks. I know there were some questions in the chat, and then we certainly understand that our younger learners, regardless of disability, may have some difficulty with wearing masks. We will incorporate mask breaks. And also we can teach kids how to tolerate and over time cope with maybe some discomfort. But we did increase our PPEs for our adults who are working with students for whom we need to physically prompt or work a little bit more closely with. I know there were questions about, I know Dr. Wool mentioned this, but we do have some hearing impaired students, and I just purchased a large quantity of clear masks. We also have face shields, but I purchased clear masks for both teachers and speech and language pathologists, but classroom teachers who work with our hearing impaired students, in addition to clear masks for our students, our little students, who need a child mask that if they're working on articulation or speech issues, we will be trying those out as well. We do want to trial them. I've heard some mixed reviews about them, so it is a work in progress. The other thing I did want to say was that, and also we will use closed captioning. There's a lot of research that actually closed captioning is an effective tool to teach literacy as well, even if hearing is not an issue. And that speaks to all of our special educators, and many of our general educators have taken classes over the years in what we call universal designs for learning, which is an instructional methodology that provides the greatest access to the greatest number of students. And we're really thinking about that when students have to be a little bit more independent learners at home. So that is ongoing work. And I've also just a few more things, because I know this is a really sensitive area, and it is true that not all of our students with IEPs are able to come in person at this time. And you know, that is heartbreaking. I know all of us wish that life were different right now. I've spoken to many parents. I think the best way to manage this is to just keep the lines of communication open. I do feel that there will be many, you know, additional synchronous experience on home days than maybe you felt last spring. And if we need to have a CSE meeting and reconsider the supports, we will do just that. So we are here. We are unable to, if your child is coming to school 2 days a week, we are unable to provide all of their speech therapy. I've gotten several questions about that in person, because we would not be able to meet the IEP mandates. So it will be, you know, a real 50% in person and then 50% live, but via Zoom.
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions in the chat. And Jen, if you could just check the chat, I think there are 2 questions you can respond to privately. That would be helpful to me. Thank you, Julie. Next slide, please. So this is comes out of a phenomenal observation last night by our Director of Special Education. Now that we have the virtual option for anyone, prior to this, it was students with underlying health conditions that were the only ones eligible for the virtual option. But Mrs. Snyder reminded me that many families who have children in these circumstances actually want their children to attend. So when we send you the new survey on Friday, you certainly can have the opportunity to say, are there additional kinds of PPE that would allow my child to attend school on the days they're eligible to come? And of course, we're going to work with you on that. So look for that as well. So an important subtle shift there. So many parents want their children in school. We'll do whatever we can to provide additional PPE. And I also want to just mention in the realm of teacher protection. So in the instances where students, because of their disability, cannot wear masks, we are also going to provide additional PPE to our teachers. And we will also make a determination as to whether or not a student is in any way putting other kids at risk. All of those things are on the variables that we consider when we construct these experiences. So don't want you to think that we're not paying very close attention. And those 2 ladies are certainly staying up at night thinking about it. This is another slide for Julie to talk to you about. I mentioned already how proud I am of the organization for having pivoted well before this crisis to get our staff ready for these kinds of daunting experiences that kids too often are experiencing in life. So Julie, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yes, sure. So there's been a lot of important guidance and discussion about the mental health and wellness of our children, of our parent community, of our teachers, just really about for everyone. And so I'm proud that we were able to provide training this summer, and Jed Markarian, who's on this panelist tonight, partnered with one of our elementary school psychologist, Dr. Karen Feldman, and provided an elementary training on how to develop trauma-informed teaching practices. And it's really a lens with which we approach our students, which I would argue is important at any point, let alone during a international pandemic. And so many of our faculty and administrators have been trained in this. All of our elementary psychologists are trained in this. They are going to be partnering with their building level principals and assistant principals and instructional specialists as part of our reorientation. So we're really committed to, and in a very developmentally appropriate way, you know, our 5-year-olds and our 10-year-olds and our 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds, they all experience this in different ways, and it looks different. And so we're providing very developmentally appropriate trauma-informed training to the entire school district, and we're here, we're in it together. And I really would, you know, encourage, pick up the phone, talk to us. These are difficult times, and we can, you know, think out loud and brainstorm together.
And I think that's, you know, that ending note is so important. Parents, we've tried really hard to figure everything that we can possibly figure out, but we know that your children are going to hit certain bumps. Your principals are your first point of communication. But if your child has a special issue, there are lots of people on this Zoom that are available to you. If they're special education students, certainly Mrs. Toscano is the first person I would turn to, and Mrs. Snyder partners with her hand in glove. All of our assistant principals, our instructional coaches, these are people that can help you and help teachers help your children. So let us know how we can help.
And I meant to add, there's a really good, we partner with the Harrison Youth Council, and they have been working with us very closely. I know Dr. Ladwig is a good communication, and they are here for us in the community to provide support, especially when our kids and our families are working with our kids at home.
I thank you for saying it, Julie. I was just going to say, one of the wonderful things about the Harrison Youth Council is they provide family counseling, which makes them just an invaluable resource to us, because that is not something that we can provide. They're wonderful partners. They've been with us a long time. They have wonderful, devoted people that work in our schools with all 4 buildings. Next slide, please, Michael.
Yeah, I guess I think I covered it, but I think one of the key factors when we think about social emotional learning and in turn trauma-informed teaching practice is to equip our young kids with the skills to manage their big feelings. And again, this is very depending on the age, we have different techniques too, because there could be big feelings. There could be some anxiety, there can be anger, there can be frustration, feelings of loss. And it's a skills-based approach that we take to equip, just like we teach kids how to read and write and do math. There are skills that we can teach our kids to help them manage their emotions. And so that really is at the heart of the work. We've increased psychological support at Parsons, for example. We've also hired a district-wide behavioral specialist. So this is we've put resources there and significant training in this area, which we think is, crucial.
Thank you. So comprehensive. I'm going to just hit a couple of quick questions. And Jen, I'm going to ask you also to go back in, and there's another one I think you can respond to. But will remote learning be available all year long? Hopefully not, because if we get a vaccine or things get better, we'll all be able to go back to school. But barring any breakthrough, we will maintain the virtual option through the remainder of the year. And you know, someone's asking about the infection rates in phase 2. Right now, we are governed by entities, as I mentioned at the outset, that will make those determinations for us. And Brian, there is another question, if I could just come back, Brian Ladwig, and just help some folks clarify. There's some anxiety, and I certainly understand it. When would a family likely be notified if their child had exposure to someone who had COVID-19?
Well, we would want to share that information as quickly as we possibly could, having consulted first with the New York State Department of Health. So again, that tight coupling of communication, it's actually the Westchester County Department of Health, which is a subset of the New York State Department of Health. They would be directing us, directing our actions, and doing outreach themselves to those families. So the timeline and communication, you know, it's hard to say definitively to parents, but our goal would be to try to turn that communication around as quickly as possible, preferably within that same day.
Thanks, Brian. That's what I thought, but I thought it'd be better coming from you. Next slide, please, Michael. So this, I think, is a very underrated slide, and I want to talk about extracurricular sports activities, less so at the elementary level, although you heard that Chris has done a wonderful job of reinventing the physical education program. It's really a place where kids can be grounded and learn some wellness skills, so we're excited about that. But the board has made a decision, and we're very grateful for their thoughtfulness in thinking about what is it that makes a school experience meaningful for kids. Well, sure, it's going to class, but it's also those amazing experiences you have with other kids in a club or an activity. So the elementary principals will share a little bit about the clubs, but we are going to maintain clubs. They may be virtual sometimes. They may meet on Husky and Pride days with different groups, but we think the opportunity to have kids connect emotionally and personally is profoundly important as high quality instruction. So maybe you, the four of you, can share some of the clubs that will be going forward.
Sure, I'll talk. You know, each of our schools have some unique clubs to their school culture and to what has been traditions in our schools. Where we could have in-person clubs, like we have a garden club at the Preston School, and we're able to do that safely and socially distanced, we will. Our larger clubs like Green Key will be done, meetings will be probably done virtually, but still we're looking for ways certainly for kids to be active in those clubs because they look forward to them, and it's something that it will be a big part of their experience.
Anybody else want to add anything to the club dynamic before we move along?
Yeah, just to push off what Dennis said, when we closed last year, lots of our clubs went virtual. So teachers have had experience thinking about what that could look like and what it could look like blended. So I had everything from a fitness club running to a science club where kids were doing experiments using household objects. So our teachers are very creative about how to engage students and keep them involved in all sorts of different scenarios. And this will give us ways to have a blended club environment where maybe some of it's virtual and some of it's on site.
And I just want to echo that, you know, our district and this particular superintendent has a deep commitment to the fine and performing arts, and it's pained us to see it diminished. And Stephanie Goldman, who's still on this Zoom, we are talking about ways to perhaps find a way to have the kids at the elementary level still experience a performance. We're not sure that we can do it, but know that we are continually looking for ways to make more things happen for children. So stay tuned. Next slide, please, Michael. Mr. Greenfield, do you want to handle this one?
I will. For the most part, we've discussed this. I think Mrs. Himes referenced that we would be providing iPads to K2 students. And for 3-5 students, Chromebook. And coinciding with that, somebody asked the question whether there'll be different platforms and entry. We've standardized the portal for K2 students who use Seesaw, and so it's a single login, and that's where access to all online resources will be made for students. And in grades 3 through 5, for the most part, students will be using Google Classroom, but there's a transition point from Seesaw. But we'll be providing devices to all students, and those students will have to, they will basically have them for the year. There will be devices should they break or need to be repaired, but it will become a device per child and be cared for by the child and the family. I think there are some references to software licenses. We have expanded our licensing. Mr. McCourtney talked about Dreambox learning, right? Dreambox learning. We've also added quite a range of online resources that will be extensions and enrichment for students. All of those will be accessible through the website and the portal. And that includes online literature. So the library media specialists have been involved in that, and we have expanded to a great extent all the resources. So I think we're quite prepared from a technological perspective, and every student, anybody who has a need for a device or wireless internet access of any kind will be supported, and one only needs to reach out through our help desk online to the technology department. And I think over the summer, we distributed almost 300 devices and wireless hotspots to families in need. So if there's any question, confidentially, please just reach out to us and we'll provide that support.
Thank you, Michael. Christian, can I ask you a question? So the learning board that you showed would be accessible as through the primary portal of Seesaw for Kids. Where would that live?
Yes, it would live both on Seesaw and our Google Classroom platforms. They may look slightly different given the audience, but it will be the same premise.
So parents at home, the work that you saw tonight will be accessible to your kids through one central location, which I think will make it even more useful for you and for your children.
And Dr. Will, there was one question that I'll just amplify. One parent asked if during the asynchronous days, the schedule that was outlined would need to be followed. And the answer is no. It's a recommended schedule based on the structured learning environment that would maintain continuity of learning. However, on asynchronous days, there is some flexibility as to when the activities get completed, depending on a schedule that parents would guide students on, except when there are synchronous experiences that have been scheduled for students on those days. So there's flexibility and there's access, and the question was, will those resources be accessible? They will be accessible online, basically 24/7, and you can flex how and when your child engages those enrichment and extension activities.
That's right.
There's also a permanence to those materials, so students that require reteaching have access to that as we go through the school year.
That's another important point. I didn't really respond to that question thoroughly, Christian, but one of the questions was that can a student access this material at different times of the day based on what's going on in their house? The answer to that question is yes, right?
The answer to that question is yes.
I think that provides tremendous flexibility for parents who might want to supervise or support kids when they're actually engaged in the learning. So another really excellent feature to the new set of resources. There was one other thing I wanted to respond to. Brian, I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to pose it to you as if I don't, Dr. Ladwig. What happens if students or children refuse to be vaccinated?
That's always a very good question. The New York State Department of Education has made expressly clear that all vaccination requirements remain in force and effect. So all of the required vaccinations that are required for school attendance must be obtained by the first day of school. And that's true whether a student is learning in the hybrid model or in the 100% virtual model. It is a consistent requirement. There is no exception to that.
That's very helpful. And we want to remind, our health experts from all sides have reminded us the significance in this particular year of getting your flu vaccine. Make sure you take care of all of those things, because obviously we don't want a pandemic and a flu pandemic on top of that. So anything we can do to keep our children healthy, we appreciate your support in handling that. Next slide, please.
Lou, while I'm transitioning, there was one more question
Yes,
that we can
please.
easily answer. Somebody asked about New York State assessments in 2021.
I actually answered that question multiple times.
Okay.
Right now, we have no new information on New York State assessments, but thank you for mentioning it, Michael.
Okay.
I should have published it. I must have answered it privately. So transportation, we've talked about a lot about this. I'm going to move through it very quickly since I mentioned it at the outset. So in the new survey, we will ask you again, because obviously your choice may have switched from in-person to virtual, whether or not you are willing to transport your own child or whether or not there's some change. However, that said, we've already made a determination that the buses will run at 50%. I mentioned earlier, one child per seat, mask on at all times, no eating. The only exception to that is siblings can sit together. What will happen on the cleaning protocols is that the buses will not be fully sanitized between the morning and the afternoon. All the high-touch surfaces will be cleaned, and at the end of each run, at the end of each day, they'll be fully sanitized. If a student enters the bus without a mask, one will be provided for them. The bus drivers and the monitors will wear coverings, with one rare exception. If the bus driver's glasses are foggy, he's allowed to take it off. I think I covered 2 slides for one, but give me the next slide there, Michael. I'll mention a few of these things. I already talked about the disinfection. We are going to have the windows open when it's appropriate and it's not freezing. Between routes, the windows will be open and aired out, so that's good. Just like you would enter our building and have to answer the COVID symptoms, and your children, bus drivers and monitors will answer those screening protocols daily. Gloves will be provided to the drivers and the monitors, and the rule that will be strictly enforced is no eating or drinking on the school bus. Next slide. Food service is another challenging experience for us. So if you're if a child is on free and reduced lunch, they are eligible for food every day, whether they're at home or not, and it will be provided. That will be a question in the survey that you can respond to. However, if you're not, and you'd still like to purchase lunch on the days that you're not in school, you need to let us know that in the survey as well, and we will charge your account and you will be receiving additional lunches. We don't know how that lunch will be distributed as yet, but Margaret will tell you what we're thinking about at the moment.
Right. So thank you again, Dr. Wool. We're working closely with our food services company just to figure out the best way to distribute meals to the students. One option was for the days that they're in school, at the end of the day when they leave, we'll send them home with a breakfast and lunch the next day, or the next 2 consecutive days, enough food until they return again to be on site. At the last meeting with the food services company, we had not yet implemented the virtual option. So that will be, we're meeting again this Tuesday. So that'll be the area that we'll have to get meals to those students that were learning from home every day. They are aware, just a couple of things to point out. Any child that has an allergy, they're going to keep, can you hear me? Now I think my internet's unstable. If your child has an allergy, that
Margaret,
will be on record, and there will be no. Can you hear me?
We cannot. We cannot. Let me finish it up. It's one of those nights for the internet, I suppose. Maybe it's the number of people online. So the custodial staff has very discrete protocols for disinfecting the furniture between lunch periods. Students will always be reminded, and there'll be lots of hand washing and sanitizer available to them. The cafeteria is already laid out and socially distanced, and those will be strictly enforced. And all of the food service workers have already received training by the host company, and we've seen and supervised some of that training so that they understand the safe food handling and preparation for the spread of COVID-19. So food is likely going to be completely wrapped. There won't be serving. So if you want a hot lunch, it'll be contained. Your knife, fork, and spoon will be also in a sealed plastic container. So we're going to limit contact as much as we possibly can. And if somebody needs a device and doesn't have one, you just need to contact the, this is a question just popped up, I'm sorry. You can contact the technology department and we'll arrange for pickup. You don't need to agonize over it. We'll figure it out for you. Next slide, please. So before I close out, I'm going to remind my colleague Michael Greenfield that when we close this out, I want to move immediately to our reopening page to give you a chance to realize that you don't have to watch this ever again. You can go to the website and learn all about the things that you want to know. Each level has its own breakout points, and I'll show you in a minute. But let's just talk about the reopening plan. So everything we said to you tonight is the best that we know right now. We are research practitioners dedicated to the safety and well-being of your children and our faculty and staff. So the plan could change at any moment if we find better ways of doing things. So understand that the document is never finished. We will regularly update the webpage, and we will regularly update you. I'll be giving monthly superintendent updates to the district's PT Council, which has representation in all 6 schools. But I'll also, as I did last year, be sending out letters occasionally, and the principals will continue to communicate with you, and you hopefully with them. I mentioned early on in the presentation that we will be surveying you 3 times in the first 10 weeks, the 2-week, 4-week, and 10-week mark, and we'll be looking for different kinds of information at each point that we do that. Let me just see before I close out.
Dr. Wool, one quick question that I think is important that we didn't touch on. One parent stated, how will parents be notified if students are not proficiently completing their asynchronous learning activities?
Yes, that's a good question. I was about to answer it. I'm staring at it, but thank you for bringing it up. So the communication with teachers in our district has always been one of, I think, our strengths. Teachers fully understand that if kids are not performing, whether in person or virtually, that it's their responsibility to reach out to parents, and they will be doing so regularly. Remember, they have touch points with kids every other day, and that will be, I think, the first bellwether. If a student isn't responsive, isn't doing their work, then the teacher will actively reach out to the parents via telephone, via email, but those contacts will be the same as they have always been, perhaps even more intense than they have been in the past. We did a very good job, I think, last year of monitoring kids who were at risk. This is a different kind of risk. Sometimes kids are just going to wander away because nobody's supervising them. The teachers will be attentive to the kind of work production and engagement that kids are showing. Also, a lot of these tools allow us to monitor how well the kid is engaged. Is the student online? Are they doing their work? How long are they persisting? So there are other tools that we will be advantaging as well. Just looking quickly to see if there's any other open questions I can answer before we shift to the final part of this presentation.
Dr. Wool, I think an important question to just clarify for parents is when they get their classroom assignments, that they will also be getting their Husky or Pride assignments at the same time. That I don't think that was clear. I know there's a lot of concern about daycare, childcare, and that sort of thing.
So let me say 3 things, and principals, if I'm overstating, correct. You're going to receive your class placement. It will provide you the full class list. not just the 12 kids you're with. That was a question that emerged 3 times tonight. The second is you'll also be given the determination of you're in the Husky or Pride group. What was the third? Was there a third question in there? I think those were the 2 main questions I saw regarding placement. So you'll know who's in your child's class, as you typically do, but it'll be the whole class. You will know whether you're Husky or Pride, and that will be your date for school. Your designation, your calendar day will be aligned with your team. Anything you guys want to add to that before we jump to the next phase? Elementary principals, last change?
Usually receive the entire class list at that time, but this year is different. We will?
Well, I think we're going to try to provide that because there are some concerns about shared childcare, but we'll talk about that. My understanding is likely.
Okay.
Any other things for the good of the order, principals, before I ask Michael to close this part of the presentation? Okay, would you share the other web page, Michael, if you wouldn't mind? We've developed a reopening page, which makes, I think, navigating all this information somewhat more manageable for you. Here you'll see, there's the timeline, but on the left are the critical elements. So let's assume you had a question that you wanted to revisit from the part of the presentation where Brian took you through the health and safety protocols. You'd click on that button, and then if you looked down this laundry list of things, you would see all of the specifics for face covering, social distancing, all of the critical informations, how things are cleaned, visitations. But I want to just focus, if we could, for a second on the elementary school, because I think it's very simple to find. So here are various tabs. So there were a lot of questions then about mask wearing. Would you mind clicking on that one, Michael? So everything related to mask wearing, including breaks, what's happening at lunch, is contained right here. If you had a question about social and emotional well-being, you'd click that tab. If you want to know about tech support, ENL, the instructional models, it gets its own tab. All of those things are available to you in this format, which makes everything a lot more simple to navigate. Just if you could just scroll all the way down for a second. There's also a very lengthy FAQ, and I apologize tonight if we didn't answer your questions. If you were on Facebook, we will be collecting them and monitoring them. One of the individuals that was monitoring Facebook for us had a family emergency and left in the middle of the meeting. So my apologies for that, but we will review all those questions. And if there's anything that wasn't answered or needs to be addressed in the FAQ, it will go there. The FAQ is broken into 5 big component parts, but I think you'll find that almost everything you asked tonight is already answered in some manner, shape, or form on this website. So,
Lou, the way the website is designed, also the translate feature allows
absolutely
Spanish-speaking parents or people who speak other language to translate it with using this feature.
One wonderful reminder, Michael. Thank you. Now, folks, a couple of things I want to just say tonight. Michael, could you close your screen and just put back the whole Zoom?
Happily, yeah.
So I apologize for the minor glitches in tonight's presentation. I hope it didn't detract from the outstanding work of our teachers and instructional coaches. So much of what you saw tonight has to do with preparing the organization to serve your children well. So if there are 2 takeaways tonight, I hope that they are these. The first and foremost is that we have done a comprehensive preparation of every aspect of the organization beginning in May. Quick reminder, 75 courses, 1,400 registrations, 700 children in summer programs doing field testing and research, over 1,000 hours of curriculum writing, over 500 lessons prepared, 500 more to come. The health and safety protocols, the app, every possible contingency we can put in place, and adding a virtual option because ultimately we want the safety and well-being of your children to be placed in your hands. But here's the other thing I ask that you remember. As hard as we've tried, and I'm so proud of the people on the screen and the entire organization, virtually no one has rested this entire summer. And so my hat is off to them. Our teachers have done phenomenal work throughout the summer, literally and figuratively exhausting themselves to get ready to do this work well. But we all need to go into this knowing that it will be imperfect. There will be bumps. And we need to be reasonable at what we expect of our children, of what we expect of our teachers, and we must count on each other doing the right thing if this is going to work. I predicate everything I do on trying to do the very best job I can for the 3,600 children that go to school in this district. I can tell you unequivocally, your school board is totally dedicated to that mission, and so are we. We know that not everything that everybody wanted is there. We've made the best choices based on the research that we have done that serves the greatest benefit to the most kids. That is our work. That is our commitment. I thank you for sticking with us at this very lengthy point in the presentation. There are still 302 of you in the webinar and a couple hundred more on YouTube. So this will be posted tomorrow. Thank you so much for your indulgence and your ongoing support. We are in this together, and we're going to do the very best we can for your kids. Have a safe night. Good night, everybody.
Good night.